Sometimes the things we run from have a way of finding us, no matter how far we go. For 30 years, 61-year-old Callen Rourke lived alone in the Smoky Mountains, building a life in the wilderness to escape the mistakes she made back home. When wildfire tore through the valley, it destroyed everything: her hand-built lodge, her careful solitude, the distance she kept from the daughter she left behind. Standing in the ashes, Callen expected nothing but ruin. But she found something small buried in the wreckage. Something impossible, something that proved her past had been closer than she ever imagined. What survived that fire, and why does it change everything? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning Callen Rourke turned 61, she woke before dawn to the sound of a barred owl calling from the ridge above her lodge. She lay still in the darkness, listening to the familiar voice echo through the pines, and thought about how much she'd come to love the solitude of these mountains. 30 years, 3 decades of silence, of seasons passing without the complication of other people's expectations or disappointments. Out here, she answered to no one but herself and the rhythms of the natural world. She rose from bed and pulled on her worn flannel shirt, the one with the careful patches at the elbows that she'd stitched herself last winter. The floorboards creaked under her feet, a sound she'd come to find comforting over the years. These were the boards she and Marcus had laid together 28 years ago, working side by side in companionable silence, building something that would outlast them both, or so they'd thought. The lodge stood at the end of a narrow valley in the Smoky Mountains, accessible only by a rough dirt road that became impassable half the year. That isolation had been exactly what she wanted when she and Marcus first arrived. They'd hiked in on foot that first time, carrying everything they owned in 2 backpacks and a determination to leave their old lives behind. She was 33 then, and Marcus was 40. Both of them were running from something, though they'd never quite named what. Some agreements are better left unspoken. Callen moved through her morning routine with the efficiency of long practice. She stoked the fire in the wood stove, set the kettle to boil, and stepped out onto the porch to check the weather. The air felt different this morning, dry and tense, with an edge to it that made her uneasy. August had been unusually hot, and they'd seen less rain than normal. The forest felt brittle, waiting. Her horse, Ember, nickered from the small corral beside the lodge. The mare was getting old now, 16 years since Callen had bought her from a farmer down in Ridgeline. The town was 45 miles away by the winding mountain roads, and Callen made the trip maybe 4 times a year for supplies she couldn't grow or make herself. Ember had carried her faithfully through all those journeys, patient and steady even as her muzzle went grey. Callen crossed the yard to feed the horse, running her hand along Ember's warm neck. "Morning, girl," she said softly. The horse leaned into her touch, and Callen felt the familiar comfort of that simple exchange. Animals didn't judge. They didn't ask questions about the choices you'd made or the people you'd left behind. She'd built a good life here. A small life, perhaps, but an honest one. The lodge was modest, 2 rooms downstairs and a sleeping loft above. The walls were chinked logs that Marcus had cut and hauled from the surrounding forest. The roof was tin, which made a beautiful sound when it rained. She had a vegetable garden that provided most of her food through the growing season, and she supplemented that with what she could forage or hunt. Her needs were simple, and she liked it that way. Inside, she poured her tea and sat at the wooden table Marcus had built. His hand-carved walking stick leaned against the wall nearby. She'd kept it after he died 7 years ago, unable to part with one of the few things he'd made with his own hands. The stick was beautiful work, smooth and balanced, with a grip worn to fit perfectly in the palm. Marcus had been good with his hands, patient with wood and tools, in a way she'd always admired. They'd had a good marriage, she thought. Quiet, built on mutual respect and shared purpose rather than passion. They'd understood each other's need for space, for privacy, for the kind of silence that wasn't empty but full of unspoken understanding. When he died suddenly on a hike up the ridge, his heart simply stopping mid-step, she'd grieved deeply but without drama. She buried him in a clearing he'd loved, marked the spot with a cairn of stones, and continued the life they'd built together. But alone now. Always alone. Callen sipped her tea and watched the light change through the window. The sun was rising later these days, summer tipping toward autumn. Soon the leaves would turn, and she'd need to start preparing for winter, cutting firewood, preserving what remained of the garden harvest, checking the roof and chimney for any damage that needed repair before the snow came. She'd done it all before, year after year, and there was comfort in that repetition. Out here, time moved differently. Not the frantic, forward-rushing time of the world she'd left behind, but something slower and more cyclical. Seasons turned, trees grew and fell. She grew older, her body accumulating the small aches and limitations of age, but her mind stayed clear and her hands stayed strong. This was the life she'd chosen. This was where she belonged. The thought of her other life, the one before Marcus, before the mountains rarely surfaced anymore. She'd trained herself not to think about it, not to remember the daughter she'd left behind or the spectacular failure of her earlier existence. Some doors, once closed, were better left that way. But this morning, standing on her porch with her tea growing cold in her hands, Callen felt the peculiar unease return. The air was too still, the birds were too quiet. Something felt wrong in a way she couldn't name. She walked the perimeter of her property, checking the traplines she kept for small game, inspecting the garden for signs of deer or other intruders. Everything looked normal, but the feeling persisted. Even Ember seemed restless, pacing the corral and tossing her head at nothing visible. By midday, the temperature had climbed higher than usual, and the sky had taken on a hazy quality. Callen stood in her garden, pulling weeds from around the tomato plants, when she noticed the smell. Smoke, faint but unmistakable, carried on a shift in the wind. Forest fires were always a risk in these mountains, especially in dry years. She'd watched distant blazes from her ridge before, tracking their progress and calculating whether they posed any threat to her valley. But this smell was closer than she liked. She straightened, wiping sweat from her forehead, and scanned the ridgeline. Nothing visible yet, but the wind was picking up, coming from the east. She went back inside and dug out the battery-powered emergency radio she kept in a drawer. Marcus had insisted on it years ago, and she'd maintained the habit of keeping fresh batteries on hand even after he was gone. She turned it on and scrolled through the channels until she found the local emergency broadcast. The voice that crackled through was calm but urgent. A wildfire had started 20 miles east, driven by high winds and low humidity. Evacuation orders were in effect for several areas. They listed the zones by name, places Callen barely remembered from her infrequent trips to town. Then they mentioned her valley. Her hands tightened on the radio. Voluntary evacuation, they said. Residents should prepare to leave if conditions worsened. Fire crews were working to establish containment lines, but the winds were unpredictable. Callen set down the radio and looked around her home. Everything here was irreplaceable, not because of monetary value, but because of what it represented. Every object, every piece of furniture, every tool on the wall carried memories of the life she and Marcus had built. How do you choose what to save when everything matters? She forced herself to think practically. She moved through the lodge, gathering essentials, her warmest clothes, her knife, matches, a tarp, basic food supplies. She filled water bottles and stuffed everything into her old hiking pack. Her hands moved automatically, but her mind was racing. This couldn't be happening. Not now. Not like this. The smoke smell grew stronger as the afternoon wore on. When Callen stepped outside again, she could see a dark smudge on the eastern horizon. The fire was coming. She made the decision quickly, the way you have to when time runs out. She would take Ember and ride to higher ground, to a spot she knew on the western ridge where the fire would be less likely to reach. She'd wait there, watch, and come back when it was safe. But even as she saddled Ember with shaking hands, even as she tied her pack to the saddle and led the mare away from the only home she'd known for 3 decades, Callen felt something inside her break. This place had been her sanctuary, her escape, her penance. Losing it felt like losing herself. She didn't look back as they climbed the trail. She couldn't. By the time Callen reached the ridge, the wind had become a living thing, hot and violent, carrying ash and embers on invisible currents. She and Ember stood on the high ground, 2 miles west of the lodge, and watched the valley below fill with smoke. The fire itself wasn't visible yet, but its approach was unmistakable. The whole eastern sky had gone dark, and the air tasted of burning. Callen tied Ember to a sturdy pine and spread her tarp between 2 trees, creating a rough shelter. Her hands trembled as she worked. The emergency radio in her pack continued its steady stream of updates, but she barely heard the words. Her attention was fixed on the valley, on the column of smoke rising from the direction of her home. Night came, and with it, the fire. She saw it first as a glow on the horizon, an orange light that pulsed and grew brighter. Then came the sound, a low roar that built and built until it drowned out everything else. The fire moved through the forest with terrifying speed, consuming everything in its path. Trees exploded into flame. The air itself seemed to burn. Callen stood transfixed, watching her world end. The lodge, she couldn't see it directly from this angle, but she knew the moment it caught. There was a brightness, a surge in the flames, and then it was gone. 30 years of life reduced to ash in minutes. The garden, the corral, the carefully stacked woodpile, the little clearing where Marcus was buried, all of it disappearing into the inferno. She sank to her knees, unable to look away. Ember whinnied nervously behind her, but Callen barely registered the sound. Something in her chest felt hollow, scooped out. She'd lost everything before her first marriage, her daughter, her old life, but she'd always had this place as proof that she could build something lasting. Now even that was gone. The fire burned through the night, and Callen didn't sleep. She sat with her back against a tree, watching the destruction, and let herself remember the things she'd spent 30 years trying to forget. Sophie. Her daughter's name still hurt to think, even after all this time. Sophie had been 16 when Callen left. A difficult age, full of anger and rebellion and raw, unfiltered emotion. They'd fought constantly that last year, screaming matches that left them both shaking and hoarse. Callen had been 33, divorced, working 2 jobs to keep them afloat, and drowning under the weight of it all. She'd felt like a failure at everything, at marriage, at motherhood, at simply being a functional adult. And Sophie had been so angry at her father for leaving, angry at Callen for not being enough, angry at the world for being harder than it should have been. The fights had escalated until they were both saying things they couldn't take back. The final fight, Callen still remembered every word. "I hate you," Sophie had screamed, her face red and twisted with teenage fury. "I wish you were dead. I wish you'd never had me." And Callen, exhausted and broken, had looked at her daughter and felt nothing but the desperate need to escape. She'd left that same night, scrawling a brief note that explained nothing, and driven west without a plan or destination. Just away from the failure, the guilt, the crushing weight of not being the mother her daughter deserved. She'd met Marcus a few months later at a diner in Tennessee. He'd been sitting alone, nursing coffee and looking as lost as she felt. They'd started talking, and within a week they'd decided to disappear together. No past, no questions, just 2 people building something new in the wilderness. For 30 years, she'd told herself it was the right choice, that Sophie was better off without her, that some people weren't meant to be mothers, and acknowledging that was better than staying and making everything worse. But sitting on this ridge, watching everything she'd built turn to ash, Callen felt the weight of that old lie. She'd abandoned her daughter, There was no prettier way to say it. She'd run away when things got hard, and she'd never looked back, never tried to make amends, never tried to explain, never even checked to see if Sophie was all right. What kind of mother does that? The fire burned itself out by dawn, leaving a landscape of blackened earth and smoking stumps. The smoke was still too thick to risk going down into the valley, so Callen remained on the ridge, rationing her food and water, waiting for the all-clear from the emergency broadcasts. It came 3 days later. The fire was fully contained. Residents could return to assess damage, though they were warned to expect total loss in most cases. Callen made her way down slowly, leading Ember through the still smoking forest. The devastation was complete. Where there had been living trees, there were now charred spikes pointing at a grey sky. The ground was hot under her boots, crunching with ash. Everything recognizable was gone. The valley where her lodge had stood was a scorched wasteland. The stone foundation remained, and the chimney stood like a tombstone, but everything else had been consumed. Callen walked through the ruins in a daze, trying to orient herself by the bones of what had been. Here was where the kitchen had stood. There was where she'd kept her bed. That pile of twisted metal had been her wood stove. She knelt in the ashes, running her hands through the still warm debris, and found small things. A piece of pottery, glazed and cracked. The melted remains of Marcus's wedding ring, gold pooled and deformed by the heat. She picked it up carefully, the metal still hot enough to feel, and closed her fist around it. "I'm sorry," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if she was talking to Marcus or Sophie or herself. She worked her way methodically through the ruins, cataloguing loss. Most of it was meaningless clothes, tools, furniture, things that could be replaced if she chose to rebuild. But some of it hurt in ways she hadn't expected. The table where she'd eaten her meals for 3 decades, the chair Marcus had preferred, the small carved box where she'd kept her few pieces of jewelry. She was standing where their bedroom had been, poking through the ash with a stick, when she found something that shouldn't have existed. A metal lockbox, partially buried in the debris. Callen stared at it for a long moment, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. She and Marcus hadn't kept any lockbox. They'd owned almost nothing worth locking up. Their lives had been deliberately simple, free of the kind of valuables that required safekeeping. But here it was, blackened and battered but intact. She pulled it free from the ash, wiping away the soot with her sleeve. It was about the size of a shoebox, made of heavy steel, with a simple combination lock on the front. The lock had partially melted, the dial useless. Her heart was pounding. Where had this come from? And more importantly, what was inside? She used her knife to pry at the damaged lock, working carefully. The heat had warped the mechanism, but it was still holding. She hammered at it with a rock, once, twice, and on the 3rd strike, the lock gave way with a metallic snap. Callen sat back on her heels, the box in her lap, suddenly afraid to open it. The feeling was irrational. It was just a box, but something told her that whatever was inside would change everything. Some instinct warned her to walk away, to leave the past buried where it belonged. But she'd never been good at listening to her instincts. She opened the box. Inside were letters, a stack of them, tied with string, yellowed envelopes with handwriting she recognized as Marcus's. Beneath those, a photograph old, the colors faded, and underneath everything, a piece of paper that looked official, a birth certificate. Callen's hands shook as she lifted out the photograph. It showed a young girl, maybe 8 or 9 years old, with dark hair and a gap-toothed smile. The girl was standing in front of a brick house, squinting in the sunlight. On the back, in Marcus's handwriting, Emma, age 9, 2002. Emma. The name meant nothing to her. She set the photograph aside and picked up the birth certificate, unfolding it carefully. The paper was brittle with age, but the information was clear. Emma Jane Rourke, born the 3rd of April 1993. Mother, Sophie Rourke. Father, unknown. The world tilted. Callen read the words again, certain she'd misunderstood. But no, there it was in black and white. Sophie Rourke, her daughter's name, and a child born in 1993, 2 years before Callen had left. Sophie had been 14 years old in 1993. The math was simple and devastating. Sophie had gotten pregnant at 13 or 14, had the baby at 14. And Callen had been so wrapped up in her own misery, so blind to what was happening around her, that she'd never even noticed. Or had she left after? Had she known and run anyway? Callen pressed her hands to her face, trying to remember. That year was a blur of exhaustion and desperation. She'd been working constantly, barely home, leaving Sophie to fend for herself. But surely she would have noticed her daughter being pregnant. Surely she couldn't have missed something that huge, unless Sophie had hidden it. Unless she'd been so afraid of Callen's reaction that she'd kept it secret until the baby was born. And then what? Given it up for adoption? Let someone else raise her child while Callen remained oblivious. The letters. Callen grabbed the stack and untied the string with shaking fingers. The envelopes were addressed to Marcus at a post office box in a town Callen had never heard of. The return address was always the same: J. Kimball, Asheville, North Carolina. She pulled out the first letter, dated June 1998, a year after she and Marcus had built the lodge. The handwriting was neat and careful, unmistakably feminine. "Dear Marcus," it began, "thank you for your letter and for the money. Emma is doing well. She just finished second grade with straight A's. She asks about her mother sometimes, but I tell her what we agreed. Maybe someday, when the time is right. I hope you and Callen are happy together. You deserve peace. Love, Janice." Callen read it 3 times, trying to parse the meaning. Who was Janice? How did she know Marcus? And why was Marcus sending her money for a child named Emma, a child who was, according to the birth certificate, Callen's granddaughter? She grabbed another letter, this one from 2005. "Dear Marcus, Emma turned 12 this year. She's beautiful and smart, and so much like Sophie at that age, it breaks my heart. I wish things could be different, but I understand why you've made the choices you have. Callen isn't ready. Maybe she'll never be ready. But Emma deserves to know her family someday. I'm trusting you to make that happen when the time comes. J." One by one, Callen read through the letters. 15 years of correspondence, spanning from their first year in the mountains until about 6 months before Marcus died. 15 years of Marcus maintaining a secret life, sending money to this mysterious Janice, staying connected to a child Callen had never known existed. The final letter, dated January 2018, was the hardest to read. "Marcus, I know you're sick. You said not to worry, but I do. If something happens to you, what becomes of our arrangement? Emma is 25 now, living her own life, but she still asks about her biological family. She still wants to know why she was given up. I've done my best to honor your wishes, to wait until Callen is ready, but how much longer? She deserves the truth. They both do. Whatever happens, know that you've done good. You gave Emma a chance at a normal life. But secrets don't stay buried forever. Love always, Janice." Callen sat in the ashes of her home, surrounded by the physical evidence of her blindness, and felt the foundation of her understanding crack. Marcus had known. He'd known about Emma, about Sophie's teenage pregnancy, about everything, and he'd never told her. Never once, in 28 years of marriage, had he mentioned that she had a granddaughter. Why? To protect her? Because he thought she couldn't handle it? Or because he knew that she'd run again if faced with the truth? The betrayal cut deep, but beneath it was something worse. Shame. Because Marcus had been right to keep the secret. If she'd known back then that Sophie had gotten pregnant, that there was a baby, would she have stayed? Or would she have run even farther? She knew the answer. She'd already proven what kind of person she was. But now the fire had taken everything, and in its destruction it had revealed what Marcus had been protecting. The lockbox, buried in the closet floor, meant to survive. meant to be found when the time was right. Was this it? Was this Marcus's final message to her? Callen looked around at the devastation. She had nothing left. No home, no possessions, no life to return to. The universe had stripped her down to bare essentials, just herself, and the truth she could no longer avoid. She had a granddaughter, Emma, 20-something years old now, living somewhere with someone named Janice. And Sophie was out there too somewhere, 46 years old, older now than Callen had been when she left. 30 years. She'd lost 30 years. The afternoon sun beat down on the blackened landscape, and Callen sat holding the letters, feeling the full weight of what she'd done, what she'd missed, what she'd thrown away. The question now was simple. What was she going to do about it? Callen spent that first night camped in the ruins, unable to leave. Ember grazed on what little vegetation remained at the valley's edge, while Callen sat with her back against the chimney and read through Marcus's letters again by firelight. Each one revealed another piece of a story she'd been absent from. Emma had been raised by Janice Kimball in Asheville. From the letters, it seemed Janice was Marcus's cousin, someone he'd trusted to care for Sophie's baby when an adoption was needed. The arrangement had been made quickly, quietly, with Sophie's consent, but without Callen's knowledge. Because Callen hadn't been there. She'd been working, absent, oblivious to her daughter's crisis. The letters painted a picture of a child growing up loved and cared for. Birthday celebrations, school achievements, scraped knees and first crushes. All the mundane miracles of childhood that Callen had missed with her own daughter, missed again with her granddaughter. Marcus had stayed connected to Emma through Janice, sending money monthly, asking for updates, maintaining a thread of family connection that Callen had severed. She should have felt grateful that he'd done what she couldn't. Instead, she felt hollowed out. Morning came cold and grey. The emergency radio announced that temporary shelters were available in Ridgeline for fire victims. Food, clothing, assistance with insurance claims, and FEMA applications. Callen listened to the practical details and felt nothing. Insurance required documentation she didn't have. FEMA required an address, an identity, a connection to the modern world that she'd deliberately shed. She'd been living off-grid so long she barely existed on paper. No credit cards, no bank accounts beyond the small one she used for rare supply purchases. Marcus had handled most of their limited financial needs, and after he died, she'd simply continued as they'd always done. Simple. Invisible. Now that invisibility trapped her. But she couldn't stay here. The valley was destroyed, and she had no means to rebuild. Even if she wanted to, and she wasn't sure she did, it would take resources she didn't possess. The lockbox contents lay in her pack, carefully wrapped in cloth. She'd memorized the return address from the letters, J. Kimball, 412 Maple Street, Asheville, North Carolina. It would be easy enough to find. The question was whether she had the courage to go there. She spent the morning making arrangements for Ember. A neighboring property owner, someone she'd met only twice in 30 years, agreed to board the mare temporarily. The woman asked no questions, just nodded at Callen's brief explanation and helped settle Ember in a small pasture. Animals knew nothing of human complication. They simply accepted care when offered. With Ember safe, Callen had nothing keeping her in the valley. She packed what little she had, the clothes on her back, the items from the lockbox, Marcus's melted wedding ring, and started the long walk to Ridgeline. The town looked different than she remembered, though it had only been 4 months since her last supply run. Or maybe she was different. Walking the main street with ash still in her hair and the smell of smoke embedded in her clothes, Callen felt like a ghost. People stared but didn't approach. The mountain woman who kept to herself, now dispossessed by fire. She saw sympathy in their faces, and pity, and she hated both. The Red Cross had set up operations in the community center. Volunteers offered her food, clean clothes, a cot for the night. Their kindness was genuine and suffocating. Callen accepted the minimum: a sandwich, a bottle of water, and retreated to a corner to think. She was 61 years old, with no home and no plan. The sensible thing would be to take the help offered, apply for disaster relief, maybe find a small rental in town and rebuild some version of a normal life. Stay in these mountains where she at least knew the terrain. But the letters in her pack were a different kind of map, pointing to a destination she'd been avoiding for 30 years. A man approached her as she sat wrestling with the decision. He was perhaps in his late 60s, weathered in the way of people who spent their lives outdoors. His face was kind but not intrusive as he settled onto a folding chair nearby. "Rough couple of days," he said simply. Callen nodded, not trusting herself to speak. "I'm Owen Hartley, retired forest ranger, been helping coordinate some of the relief efforts." He didn't offer his hand, seeming to sense she wasn't ready for that kind of contact. "Lost your place up in Miller Valley?" "Yes." Her voice came out hoarse. "I know that property. Beautiful spot. Secluded." Owen pulled out a battered thermos and poured coffee into the lid, offering it to her. When she hesitated, he smiled slightly. "It's just coffee. No obligations." She took it. The warmth felt good in her hands. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Owen didn't push conversation, didn't offer platitudes about things getting better. He just sat, present without being demanding, and somehow that helped more than any words could have. Finally, Callen spoke. "I need to get to Asheville." Owen considered this. "That's about 3 hours east. You have transportation?" "No." "Family there?" She thought about that. "Maybe. I don't know." Owen didn't press for details. "Greyhound runs through here twice a day. Station's over on Pine Street. I could give you a ride if you want to catch the afternoon bus." "Why would you do that?" He shrugged. "Because you look like someone who needs a ride to the bus station. And because I've got nothing else to do today." Callen studied his face, looking for hidden motives, but found only quiet sincerity. Some people were simply kind. It had been so long since she'd encountered that kind of straightforward decency that she'd almost forgotten it existed. "All right," she said. "Thank you." The bus ticket took most of her cash, leaving her with barely enough for food. Owen waited with her until the bus arrived, not talking much, just a steady presence. Before she boarded, he pressed a piece of paper into her hand. "My phone number," he said, "in case you need anything. No strings, just a phone number." Callen looked at the paper, then at him. "I'm not good at accepting help." "I noticed." Owen smiled. "Offer stands anyway." The bus was half empty. Callen chose a seat near the back and watched the mountains recede through the window. The Smokies had been her home for 30 years, her refuge and her prison. Leaving them felt like stepping off a cliff, terrifying and strangely liberating at the same time. The other passengers ignored her, which she appreciated. She wasn't ready for small talk or sympathy. Instead, she stared out the window and tried to imagine what she'd find in Asheville. Would Janice Kimball even be at that address still? The last letter was 7 years old. People moved, lives changed. Emma would be 20-something now, probably didn't even live with Janice anymore. And Sophie, Callen had no idea where Sophie was. The letters hadn't mentioned her much, only scattered references to her mother and whether she'd want to know about Emma someday. The landscape changed as they drove east, mountain giving way to foothills, the wilderness yielding to civilization. Towns became more frequent, the roads more crowded. Callen felt her chest tighten with each mile. This was the world she'd left behind. The noise, the speed, the sheer density of human existence. How had she ever lived like this? But you did, she reminded herself. For 33 years before the mountains, this was your life. You just forgot. No, not forgot. Ran from. The bus pulled into Asheville as the sun was setting. Callen stepped off onto pavement that felt strange under her feet after so many years of dirt trails. The city assaulted her senses, car horns, voices, the smell of exhaust and restaurants, and too many people in too small a space. She stood on the sidewalk, gripping her pack, and fought the urge to get back on the bus. A woman bumped into her, apologized without making eye contact, and hurried on. The flow of pedestrians moved around Callen like water around a stone. She was invisible here, just another face in the crowd. The anonymity should have felt comfortable. Instead, it felt like drowning. She found a cheap motel a few blocks from the bus station. The room was small and sterile, nothing like the organic simplicity of her lodge, but it had a bed and a shower, and that would do. She locked the door, dropped her pack on the floor, and stood under hot water until her skin turned red. In the mirror, she barely recognized herself. The woman staring back was gaunt, weathered, with grey hair. She'd been cutting herself for 3 decades. Her face was lined by sun and time. She looked old. When had that happened? She dried off and sat on the edge of the bed, pulling out the letters again. In the artificial light of the motel lamp, they seemed even more impossible. Evidence of lives lived, connections maintained, all while she'd been pretending the past didn't exist. Tomorrow, she'd find 412 Maple Street. Tomorrow, she'd knock on a stranger's door and try to explain why a grandmother, who'd never met her granddaughter, was suddenly standing on the porch. Tomorrow, she'd face what she'd been running from for 30 years. But tonight, alone in a strange room in a city she barely remembered, Callen let herself cry. For Marcus, who'd kept her secrets and protected her from truths she should have faced. For Sophie, who'd needed a mother and gotten abandonment instead. For Emma, who'd grown up not knowing half her family. And for herself, for the coward she'd been and the person she might never become. The tears came hard and silent, years of them, until exhaustion finally pulled her under. Morning came too soon. Callen woke disoriented, the motel room unfamiliar after decades of waking to mountain silence. Here, the world intruded traffic noise, voices from neighboring rooms, the mechanical hum of climate control. She lay still, staring at the ceiling, and considered not going. She could get back on a bus, return to Ridgeline, accept whatever help was available, and rebuild a small life there. Safe, manageable, alone. But the lockbox contents sat on the dresser, accusing her. She rose, dressed in the clean clothes the Red Cross had provided, and studied the city map that the motel clerk had given her. Maple Street was across town, maybe 3 miles. Walkable. She'd walked farther than that in a morning plenty of times, checking her trap lines or gathering firewood. But this felt different, each step taking her closer to a confrontation she'd avoided for 3 decades. The walk through Asheville was overwhelming. The city had grown since she'd last seen it, more buildings, more traffic, more everything. Technology had advanced in ways that made her feel like a time traveler. Everyone stared at small, glowing screens, oblivious to their surroundings. Cars that looked like they belonged in science fiction movies sat at traffic lights. Callen kept her head down and walked. The physical motion helped, 1 foot in front of the other, the same way you climbed a mountain or survived a long winter. Just keep moving. Maple Street was in an older neighborhood where houses sat close together with small, tidy yards. Number 412 was a modest ranch-style home, painted pale yellow with white trim. Flower beds lined the front walk, well maintained. A Honda sedan sat in the driveway. It looked like a place where people lived normal, uncomplicated lives. Callen stood across the street, half hidden by a tree, and watched. Her heart pounded in a way that had nothing to do with the walk. She'd tracked black bear in these mountains without this level of fear. But a bear was predictable. A bear made sense. This whatever waited inside that yellow house was unknown territory. A woman emerged from the side yard, carrying gardening tools. She was perhaps in her late 50s, sturdy build, wearing dirt-stained jeans and a wide-brimmed hat. She moved with the easy confidence of someone working in familiar space, kneeling to tend the flowers, completely absorbed in the task. Could this be Janice Kimball? Before Callen could decide, a car pulled up in front of the house. A younger woman got out, mid-20s, athletic build, dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. She moved with the casual energy of youth, calling out something Callen couldn't hear. The older woman looked up, smiled broadly, and stood to greet her. They embraced with obvious affection, not the stiff hug of obligation, but the easy warmth of people who genuinely enjoyed each other's company. The young woman was talking animatedly, gesturing as she spoke. The older woman laughed, brushing dirt from her hands before touching the young woman's face with clear tenderness. Callen felt her breath catch. Something about the young woman's profile, the way she moved, triggered a recognition she couldn't quite place. Then the woman turned, and sunlight caught her face at the right angle. Sophie, the resemblance was unmistakable. The shape of the eyes, the line of the jaw, the way she held her head. This had to be Emma, her granddaughter. Callen was looking at her granddaughter for the first time. The world seemed to tilt. All the abstract knowledge from the letters crystallized into this living, breathing person. Emma, 20-something years old, standing in a flower garden, smiling at a woman who'd raised her with love and attention. Callen had failed to provide her own daughter. They went inside together, the door closing behind them. Callen stood frozen under her tree, unable to move. She should cross the street. She should knock. She should do something. But what would she say? "Hi, I'm your grandmother. Sorry, I didn't know you existed until a few days ago. Your grandfather kept you secret because he knew I'd run away again. Want to grab coffee?" The absurdity of it paralyzed her. She'd survived in wilderness for 30 years, had tracked game and weathered storms, and buried her husband with her own hands. But crossing this quiet suburban street felt impossible. Time passed. The sun moved. Callen's legs cramped from standing still, but she couldn't make herself move. She was still standing there when the front door opened again, and Emma emerged, alone this time. She walked to her car, fumbling for keys in her purse. Now. If Callen was going to do this, it had to be now. Her feet moved before her brain caught up. She crossed the street, each step feeling like walking underwater. Emma had her car door open when Callen reached the driveway. "Excuse me." Emma turned, startled. Up close, the resemblance to Sophie was even more striking. She had Callen's eyes, or rather, Callen had these eyes, passed down through generations. The recognition was visceral and disorienting. "Can I help you?" Emma's voice was friendly but cautious. A stranger approaching in a driveway warranted wariness. Callen's carefully planned words evaporated. "I'm looking for Janice Kimball." "That's my mom. Well, my adoptive mom." Emma's expression softened slightly at the mention of family. "She's inside. Did you need to talk to her?" "Mom." The word hit harder than it should have. Of course, Janice was Mom. Janice had earned that title through decades of presence, of showing up, of being there. Callen had no competing claim. "Yes. If she has a moment." Emma studied her more carefully. "Are you okay? You look a little. Do you need to sit down?" "I'm fine." Callen wasn't fine. She was the opposite of fine, but admitting that to this young woman, her granddaughter, felt impossible. Emma hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. "Why don't you come inside? I'll get Mom." They walked to the front door together, Emma making small talk about the weather, while Callen tried to remember how to breathe normally. The house interior was warm and cluttered in the way of lived-in spaces. Photos covered the walls. Emma, at various ages, school pictures and family gatherings and candid moments. A life documented. A life Callen had missed entirely. "Mom!" Emma called. "Someone here to see you." Janice appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. When she saw Callen, she stopped dead. The color drained from her face. She knew. Somehow, she knew immediately who was standing in her living room. "Emma," Janice said carefully, not taking her eyes off Callen. "Could you give us a few minutes?" Emma looked between them, confused. "Is everything okay?" "It's fine, sweetheart. This is a private matter." Janice's voice stayed steady, but her hands gripped the dish towel like a lifeline. Emma glanced at Callen again, clearly uncertain, but she nodded. "I'll be in the kitchen if you need me." When Emma was gone, Janice gestured to the couch. Sit. Before you fall down. Callen sat. Her legs gave out more than she intended, landing hard on the cushions. Janice remained standing, arms crossed. You're Callen Rourke. It wasn't a question. Yes. How Marcus told you. Marcus is dead. 7 years now. Something flickered across Janice's face. Grief, maybe, or sympathy. I know. He stopped writing. I figured. She shook her head. Why are you here? After all this time? There was a fire. My home burned. I found a lockbox in the ruins. Callen pulled the letters from her pack, hands shaking. These were inside. Janice took the letters, recognizing them immediately. She sank into a chair, looking suddenly older. He saved them, all of them. You're his cousin. Second cousin. We grew up together. He called me when Sophie needed help. Janice's eyes were hard now, protective. That girl was 14 years old, pregnant and terrified. Her mother had abandoned her a year earlier. Her father was gone. She had no one. So Marcus called me, and I did what family does. I helped. The accusation hung in the air. Her mother had abandoned her. Callen couldn't even argue. It was simply true. I didn't know, Callen said, about the pregnancy, about Emma. I know. Sophie made Marcus promise not to tell you. She was afraid. Janice stopped, seeming to reconsider her words. She didn't want you to know, and Marcus agreed to keep the secret because he just thought you couldn't handle it, that you'd run again. He was probably right. The admission cost something. Janice's expression softened slightly. Emma's been a blessing, Janice said. A joy. I never had children of my own, and suddenly there was this perfect baby who needed someone. I've never regretted it, not once. I can see that, in the photos. Callen gestured at the walls. You gave her a good life. I gave her love. That's all any child needs. The implication was clear. That's what you failed to give. They sat in heavy silence. From the kitchen came the sound of Emma moving around, trying to give them privacy while clearly curious about what was happening. Does she know? Callen asked. About Sophie? About me? She knows she was adopted. She knows her birth mother was young, that it was an open adoption arranged through family. She's never pushed for details, but in recent years, Janice hesitated. She's been asking more questions. Who, her biological mother, is, whether there's other family. I've been honest when I can be. Does Sophie know I'm here? Sophie doesn't even know you're alive. Janice's voice turned sharp. As far as she's concerned, you disappeared 30 years ago and never looked back. And now you show up out of nowhere because of some letters you found? What exactly do you want, Callen? It was a fair question. What did she want? I don't know, Callen admitted. I had to come. I had to see. Well, you've seen. Emma's fine. She's thriving. She teaches elementary school, has a good life, doesn't need complications. And Sophie, Janice's expression closed off. Sophie is none of your business. She's my daughter. You forfeited that claim 30 years ago. The words hit like a slap, true and brutal. Callen looked down at her hands, roughened by decades of mountain living. These hands had built a lodge and planted gardens and survived in wilderness, but they'd never held her granddaughter, had barely held her daughter. I know, she said quietly. You're right, but I'm here anyway, and I think I need to try, to make it right somehow. You can't make it right. There's no making this right. Maybe not, but I have to try. Janice studied her for a long moment. Sophie lives in Charlotte now. She's married, has 2 other children. She's built a good life without you. Other children. Callen had more grandchildren she'd never met. The losses kept stacking up. Will you tell me how to find her? Absolutely not. From the kitchen, Emma called out. Mom, everything okay? Janice stood, clearly ending the conversation. You need to leave. Callen rose slowly. Will you at least tell Emma I was here? Tell her there's family. If she wants to know, that's not my decision to make alone. I need to talk to Sophie first. Sophie won't want to see me. No, she probably won't. Janice walked to the door, opening it. But it's still her choice to make, not mine. And not yours. Callen moved toward the door, then paused. Emma appeared in the kitchen doorway, watching with obvious confusion. "Who are you?" Emma asked. Callen looked at this young woman, her granddaughter, and felt the weight of everything unsaid. The truth was too complicated for a doorway conversation, but she couldn't leave without saying something. "Someone who made a lot of mistakes a long time ago," Callen said. "But I hope we might talk again sometime. If you want to." Emma glanced at Janice, seeking guidance. Janice's face was unreadable. "Maybe," Emma said, clearly uncertain. It wasn't much, but it wasn't a complete rejection either. Callen would take what she could get. She stepped out into the afternoon sunlight, and Janice closed the door firmly behind her. Standing on the sidewalk, Callen felt exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with the walk across town. Confronting your failures took more energy than any physical labor. But she'd done it. She'd crossed the street, knocked on the door, faced the first piece of her past. It wasn't forgiveness or redemption, it wasn't even understanding, but it was a start. Now she just had to figure out what came next. Callen walked back through Asheville without seeing the city. Her mind was stuck in that living room, replaying every word, every look on Janice's face. The protective anger had been deserved. Everything Janice said was true, but knowing you deserved condemnation didn't make it easier to bear. She found herself at a small park and sat on a bench, watching people go about their normal lives. A mother pushed a toddler on a swing. An elderly couple walked hand in hand on the path. Teenagers laughed over their phones. The world turned, indifferent to one woman's private reckoning. Her phone, the cheap prepaid one Owen had helped her buy before she left. Ridgeline buzzed in her pocket. A text from Owen, "Made it to Asheville, okay?" She stared at the message, surprised he'd followed up. Most people offered help and forgot about it. But Owen seemed different. She typed back slowly, unused to the technology. "Yes. Thank you for asking." His response came quickly. "Find what you were looking for?" Had she? Callen considered the question. "Not sure yet. That's honest, at least. Take care of yourself." She pocketed the phone and watched the mother and child. The toddler shrieked with delight each time the swing went high. The mother's face showed pure joy, caught in that simple moment. Had Callen ever looked at Sophie like that? She must have, when Sophie was small, before everything got complicated, before Callen's depression and exhaustion turned motherhood into an endurance test rather than a joy. The sun was setting when she finally made her way back to the motel. The clerk handed her a message. Someone named Janice had called. Left a number. Callen's heart jumped. She went to her room and stared at the piece of paper for 10 minutes before gathering the courage to dial. Janice answered on the second ring. "I shouldn't be calling you." "But you are." A long pause. "Emma won't stop asking questions. She knows something significant happened, and I've never been good at lying to her." "What did you tell her?" "The truth, that you're her biological grandmother, that you didn't know she existed until recently, that her birth mother is my niece, Sophie, your daughter, who got pregnant very young and made an adoption plan." Janice's voice was tired. "She has a right to know her own story." "How did she react?" "She wants to meet you properly, have a real conversation." Janice sighed. "I think it's a mistake, but I also think she's old enough to make her own decisions." "And Sophie?" "I called her. It did not go well." Janice's voice turned carefully neutral. "She's not ready to see you, may never be ready. But she agrees that Emma should make her own choices about contact with you. So if you want to talk to Emma, you can." Callen closed her eyes. It was more than she'd expected and less than she'd hoped for. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it for Emma. because she deserves to know where she came from. But Callen, Janice's voice turned hard. If you hurt that girl, if you disappoint her, or let her down the way you did Sophie, I will make sure you regret it. Are we clear? Crystal clear. Good. Come by tomorrow at 2. Emma will be here. The line went dead. Callen sat on the edge of the motel bed, phone in hand, and tried to process what had just happened. Emma wanted to meet her. Tomorrow, she'd have to find words to explain decades of absence to a granddaughter she'd just discovered existed. How did you summarize 30 years of running away? Sleep came in fragments that night. She kept waking, reaching for water, checking the clock. The hours crawled by. Finally, she gave up trying to sleep and watched dawn break through the motel window. This day would change things. She just didn't know how yet. She spent the morning preparing, showering, finding the least worn of her donated clothes, practicing what she might say. All of it felt inadequate. What did you wear to meet your granddaughter for the first time? What words could possibly suffice? At 1:30, she started walking to Maple Street. She arrived early and waited across the street again, gathering courage. At exactly 2 o'clock, she crossed the street and knocked. Janice opened the door. Emma's in the living room. I'll be in the kitchen if you need me. But Callen, this is your one chance. Don't waste it. Emma sat on the couch, nervous energy visible in her clasped hands. She'd dressed up slightly nice jeans, a pressed shirt, as if this were a job interview rather than a family meeting. Maybe that's what it felt like to her. Hi, Emma said. Mom, Janice explained everything last night. I didn't sleep much. Neither did I. Callen sat in the chair across from her, maintaining respectful distance. I imagine you have questions. So many questions. Emma laughed nervously. I don't even know where to start. Why don't you start wherever feels right? Emma took a breath. Okay. Why didn't you know about me? How is that even possible? Callen had known this would be the first question. She'd practiced answers, but they all sounded like excuses. Better to just tell the truth. I left your mother when she was 16. Before that, I wasn't present. I was working constantly, barely home, drowning in depression. I didn't know how to handle. Your mother got pregnant at 13 or 14, and I was so absent from her life that I never noticed. Then I left, ran away to the mountains and spent 30 years convincing myself it was the right thing to do. Emma absorbed this. Sophie, my birth mother, she was just a kid herself. Yes, way too young, and completely alone because I failed her. Callen forced herself to maintain eye contact. I don't have good excuses for what I did. I was broken and I ran. That's the truth of it. And my grandfather Marcus, he knew about me? He stayed in contact with your birth mother after I left. He arranged the adoption with Janice. He sent money to help support you. He did everything I should have done. Callen's throat tightened. He was a better person than me. Why didn't he tell you? Because he knew me. He knew I'd run again if faced with the truth. Callen pulled out the photograph from the lockbox, the one of young Emma. He kept this, kept all of Janice's letters. I think he hoped someday I'd be strong enough to know, but he died before that happened. Emma took the photograph, studying her younger self. I remember this day. Janice took me to the park. I was nervous about starting 4th grade. You were beautiful. You are beautiful. I look like Sophie. Everyone says so. You do. You look like her when she was young. Before I broke her, Callen thought, but didn't say. Emma set down the photograph. Have you talked to her? To Sophie? No. Janice says she's not ready. I don't blame her. I've only met her once, 2 years ago. She agreed to meet for coffee, but it was awkward. We didn't know what to say to each other. Emma's voice went quiet. She has other children now. My half-siblings. A family. Janice mentioned that. I'm glad she has a good life. Are you? Glad, I mean. Or does it hurt that she moved on without you? The question was more perceptive than Callen expected. Both, she admitted. I'm glad she survived what I did to her. And yes, it hurts that I missed everything. but I don't have any right to that hurt. I caused it. They talked for hours. Emma asked about Callen's life in the mountains, about Marcus, about what led her to leave civilization. Callen answered honestly, not trying to paint herself in a better light. Emma deserved the truth, complicated and ugly as it was. In turn, Emma shared her life. Her childhood with Janice, who'd been loving and present in all the ways Callen hadn't been. Her education, her work as a teacher, her small apartment across town, her questions about her biological family that had grown stronger as she got older, the sense that something was missing, even though Janice had given her everything she needed. "I don't want to hurt Janice," Emma said. "She's my real mom. She raised me, but I also want to know where I come from. Is that selfish?" "That's human," Callen said. "And you're not hurting anyone by wanting to know your history." As afternoon turned to evening, Janice appeared with tea and sandwiches. The three of them sat together, the conversation becoming easier. Janice told stories about Emma's childhood, her first day of school, her obsession with dinosaurs at age 7, her high school graduation. Callen listened, hungry for every detail of a life she'd missed. At one point, Emma pulled out her phone. "Want to see pictures? I have thousands." Callen nodded, and Emma scooted closer on the couch. They scrolled through years of photos, Emma's college years, teaching moments, trips with friends. A life fully lived, documented in pixels. "Here," Emma said, stopping on one photo. "This is Sophie, from when we met 2 years ago." Callen stared at the screen. Sophie at 44, smiling slightly at the camera. She'd aged well, looked confident and put together. Nothing like the angry teenager Callen remembered. This was a grown woman who'd survived and thrived despite her mother's abandonment. "She looks happy," Callen said. "I think she is. She wasn't thrilled about meeting me, but she was kind." Emma hesitated. "She said she couldn't be a real parent to me because she'd had to parent herself when she was too young, that she'd had no example of what a mother should be." The words landed like stones. Callen handed back the phone. "That's fair," she managed. "That's probably true." Emma looked at her with something like pity. "This must be really hard. I deserve hard. Maybe, but I'm glad you're here anyway." Emma took a breath. "Would you want to stay in touch? Like, actually stay in touch? I'm not saying we'll be super close or anything, but I'd like to know you, if you're willing." Callen felt something crack open in her chest. Permission, not forgiveness, not absolution, just permission to try. "I would like that very much," she said. "More than you know." When Callen finally left that evening, stepping out into the cool night air, she felt different, lighter somehow. Despite the weight of everything discussed, Emma had given her something precious a chance, not to undo the past, but maybe to build something new on top of the ruins. Walking back to the motel, she pulled out her phone and texted Owen. "Found what I was looking for. Sort of." His response, "That's progress. Sometimes sort of is enough to start with." Maybe it was. Maybe sort of was all she could hope for right now. But it was more than she'd had 3 days ago, when she stood in the ashes of her home with nothing but regrets. Tomorrow, she'd figure out next steps. Where to live, how to move forward, whether to try reaching out to Sophie. But tonight, she let herself feel the smallest spark of hope. It wasn't redemption, it wasn't earned, but it was something. And after 30 years of nothing, something felt like a miracle. 3 days passed in a strange limbo. Callen stayed in Asheville, meeting Emma for coffee each morning, slowly building a relationship from nothing. They talked about small things, Emma's students, Callen's years in the mountains, books they'd both read, carefully avoiding the heavy topics, just learning to be comfortable in each other's presence. Janice remained cautiously welcoming, allowing the visits but keeping watchful distance. She'd earned the right to be protective. Callen respected that, never pushing, never assuming she had any claim to Emma beyond what was freely offered. But Sophie haunted the edges of every conversation. the unspoken presence, the wound that hadn't healed. Emma mentioned her occasionally, how Sophie had reacted to news of Callen's appearance, her firm refusal to meet, her anger that still burned after 30 years. She said you were dead to her, Emma admitted on the third morning. That you died the day you left, and finding out you were alive doesn't change that. Callen absorbed the words like physical blows. But what had she expected? That Sophie would welcome her back with open arms? That 30 years of abandonment could be forgiven over coffee? I understand, she said. I don't like it, but I understand it. Emma stirred her coffee thoughtfully. Janice thinks I should leave it alone. That pushing Sophie to see you will just hurt everyone. Janice is probably right, but you want to see her. It wasn't a question. Callen considered lying, then decided Emma deserved honesty. Yes, I want to explain, to apologize, to see the woman she became. But wanting something doesn't mean I deserve it. What if? Emma hesitated. What if I talked to her? Really talked to her, I mean. Told her about our conversations. Maybe if she knew you weren't just passing through, that you were actually trying. Emma, no. I won't use you as a messenger. That's not fair to you or to her. But someone has to do something. This silence doesn't help anyone. Callen reached across the table, covering Emma's hand with her own. Some silences can't be broken from the outside. Sophie has to decide when she's ready, if she's ever ready, and we have to respect that. Emma's eyes filled with tears. I finally have biological family, real family, and it's all broken before I even get to know it. Not all broken, Callen said gently. You and I are talking. That's something. It's not enough. No, Callen agreed. It's not. But it's what we have right now. That afternoon, Callen received an unexpected call. Owen Hartley. Checking in again. His persistence surprised her. How's Asheville treating you? He asked. It's complicated. Most worthwhile things are. She heard traffic noise in the background. Listen, I'm actually in town. Had to bring some documents to the Forest Service office. Any chance you want to grab dinner? No pressure, just figured you might like a friendly face. Callen almost said no automatically, then stopped herself. Owen was offering friendship with no strings attached. When had she last had that? All right, she said. Where? They met at a casual diner downtown. Owen looked the same as he had in Ridgeline, weathered, comfortable in his own skin, radiating the quiet confidence of someone who'd made peace with himself. He ordered coffee and pie without consulting the menu, clearly a regular here. So, he said when they'd settled in, you going to tell me what's complicated? Or do I just sit here and eat pie while you brood? Despite herself, Callen smiled. I found my granddaughter. Didn't know she existed until the fire. Owen's eyebrows rose. That's some discovery. That's one word for it. Callen wrapped her hands around her own coffee cup. Long story. Involves a daughter I abandoned 30 years ago and a lot of bad choices. We all make bad choices. Some of us just have more dramatic ones. You're being generous. I'm being realistic. Owen took a bite of pie, chewed thoughtfully. I was married once, 22 years, had 2 boys. Then I had an affair with a woman I worked with, and my wife divorced me. Boys barely speak to me now. That was 15 years ago, and I'm still trying to make amends. Callen studied him. I didn't know that. Most people don't. I'm not proud of it. But I learned you can't run from what you've done. You can only face it and try to do better. He met her eyes. Sounds like that's what you're doing. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just here, trying not to make things worse. That's a start. They talked for an hour. Owen shared more of his story, the slow rebuilding of relationships with his sons, the therapy he'd finally sought, the acceptance that some damages couldn't be fully repaired. Callen found herself sharing things she'd never told anyone. The depression that had overwhelmed her as a young mother, the sense of drowning that drove her away, the 30 years of hiding in the mountains, pretending the past didn't exist. "You think I'm a coward," she said finally. "I think you're human." Owen signaled for more coffee. "I think you did what you thought you had to do to survive. Whether it was the right choice, that's above my pay grade. But you're here now, facing it. That takes courage. It took a wildfire to force me here. Sometimes we need a push. Nothing wrong with that." When they parted outside the diner, Owen pulled out his phone. "Give me your number." "Real. One. Not just emergencies. I'd like to stay in touch." Callen recited the number, then asked, "Why? You barely know me." "I know enough. You're someone trying to do better. That's worth supporting." He smiled. "Plus, I'm retired and bored. Humor an old man. You're not that old. 67 last month. Definitely old." He squeezed her shoulder briefly. "Take care, Callen, and call if you need anything." Watching him walk away, Callen felt a strange warmth. Friendship. She'd almost forgotten what it felt like to have someone in her corner without judgment or expectation. The next morning, Emma texted, "Can you meet me at Janice's house? Something happened." Callen's stomach dropped. She walked the familiar route to Maple Street, scenarios racing through her mind. Had Sophie gotten worse? Had Emma changed her mind about knowing her? Janice opened the door, her expression unreadable. "She's in the living room." Emma sat on the couch holding her phone. When she looked up, her eyes were red from crying. "What happened?" Callen asked, fear climbing her throat. "I called Sophie last night. Against Janice's advice." Emma's voice was shaky. "I told her about our talks, about you, about how you seemed genuinely sorry." "Emma." She hung up on me, then sent a long text. Emma held out her phone. "You should read it." Callen took the phone with trembling hands. The text was lengthy, typed in obvious anger. "Emma, I appreciate you wanting to help, but you need to stop. That woman is not your grandmother in any way that matters. She gave birth to me and then abandoned me when I needed her most. She doesn't get to show up 30 years later and play family. I have a life. I have children I actually raised. I don't need or want her in it. Please respect that, and please don't contact me about her again. I mean it." Below that, a second message sent an hour later. "I'm sorry. That was harsh. You don't deserve my anger. But I can't do this. I can't face her. Every time I think about her, I'm 16 again, pregnant and terrified, reading the note she left. I can't do this anymore. You'll be better off without me." That note destroyed me. I spent years thinking it was my fault. And now she wants forgiveness? No, I'm not ready. I may never be ready. I love you, Emma. But leave this alone. Callen handed back the phone, unable to speak. The words cut deeper than she'd expected. Reading Sophie's pain in her own words made it real in a way nothing else had. "I'm sorry," Emma said. "I shouldn't have pushed. You were trying to help." Callen's voice came out rough. "But your mother's right. This isn't something you can fix." Janice spoke from the doorway. "Sophie called me this morning. She's upset. She asked me to ask you to leave town." "Did she?" Callen wasn't surprised. "I told her I couldn't control what you do." But Janice's voice was gentle now, pitying. "Maybe she's right. Maybe the kindest thing you can do is give her space. Go back to your life and let her keep hers. I don't have a life to go back to. The fire took that. Then build a new one somewhere else." Janice came into the room, sitting beside Emma. "I know you mean well. I believe you're genuinely sorry. But some hurts are too deep to heal, and forcing the issue will only make it worse." Callen looked at Emma, who was crying silently. At Janice, who'd been nothing but protective and fair. At the photos on the wall of a family she'd never been part of. "You're right," she said quietly. "I should go." "Wait," Emma started. "No, they're right. Your mother has every reason to want me gone, and I won't be the cause of more pain between you two. You need that relationship more than you need me. But we just started getting to know each other. I know, and I'm grateful for these few days. More grateful than I can say." Callen's throat tightened. But I won't come between you and Sophie. She's your mother. Even if I gave birth to her, she's earned that title, and I won't damage it." Emma stood, crossing to hug Callen. It was the first time they'd embraced. Emma's arms were strong around her, holding tight. "This isn't fair," Emma whispered. "No," Callen agreed. "But life rarely is." They held each other for a long moment. Then Callen pulled back, memorizing Emma's face. Her granddaughter, 20-something years of life that Callen had missed and could never get back. "Be happy," Callen said. "That's all I want. Be happy and live a good life. Where will you go?" "I don't know yet, but I'll figure it out." Callen managed a smile. "I'm good at starting over." She left before she could change her mind, walking away from Maple Street for what she knew would be the last time. The rejection hurt, but beneath it was something else. Understanding, maybe. Acceptance. Sophie had every right to her anger, and Emma needed her birth mother more than she needed a grandmother who just appeared. Back at the motel, Callen packed her few belongings. She'd been in Asheville less than a week, but it felt like longer. She'd learned more about herself in those days than in 30 years of mountain solitude. Her phone buzzed. "Owen." "How's it going?" She stared at the text for a long time before responding. "Heading back to Ridgeline. Any chance you know of a place to rent?" His response came quickly. "Actually, yes. Small cabin came available. Owner's a friend. Want me to check if it's still open?" "Please." Within an hour, Owen had arranged everything. A furnished cabin, month-to-month lease, affordable. He sent photos, modest but clean, with a view of the mountains. Not home, but a place to start. Callen bought a bus ticket for the next morning. That night, she lay in the motel bed and let herself grieve properly. Not just for what she'd lost in the fire, but for everything. Sophie's childhood, Emma's life, the 30 years she'd wasted hiding, the family she'd destroyed through her own cowardice. But beneath the grief was something new, a small seed of determination. She couldn't fix what she'd broken. She couldn't earn forgiveness she didn't deserve, but she could build a new life. One where she didn't run. One where she faced her failures instead of hiding from them. It wasn't redemption, but it was something. The bus pulled into Ridgeline on a grey afternoon, rain starting to fall as Callen stepped onto familiar ground. The town looked different now, or maybe she was different. A week ago she'd passed through here as someone fleeing loss. Now she returned as someone tentatively moving forward. Owen met her at the station, his old truck idling at the curb. He didn't ask questions, just loaded her pack and drove through the rain toward the outskirts of town. The cabin sat on 2 acres at the end of a dirt road, backing up to National Forest. Small and weathered, with a covered porch and a stone chimney. Not the isolation of her lodge, but not the suffocating closeness of the city either. A middle ground. "Owner's name is Bill Patterson," Owen said, handing her a key. "He lives in Florida now, just keeps this as a rental. Power and water are on. Propane tank's full. Should have everything you need." Inside, the cabin was simple, 1 main room with a kitchenette, a bedroom barely big enough for the double bed, a bathroom with a shower. Furniture was mismatched but functional, nothing like what she'd had, but more than she deserved. "It's perfect," Callen said. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. Rent's due first of the month." Owen smiled to show he was partly joking. "But Bill's flexible. He knows your situation." "Everyone knows my situation. Small town, people talk, but mostly they're sympathetic. Fire victims get a pass on judgment." After Owen left, Callen stood in the empty cabin and tried to figure out what came next. She had no job, limited savings, no clear purpose. For 30 years, her purpose had been survival, maintaining the lodge, living off the land, existing day to day. Now she needed something more. The next week passed in practical necessities. She arranged for Ember to be moved to a pasture closer to the cabin, found part-time work at the general store, stocking shelves and working the register. The owner, Mrs. Chen, asked no questions about her past, just showed her the systems and left her to it. Working with people again felt strange after so long alone. Customers made small talk, asked about the weather, complained about prices. Callen learned to smile and nod, to make appropriate responses, to function in society again. It was exhausting and oddly satisfying at the same time. Owen stopped by regularly, too regularly to be coincidence, but Callen didn't mind. He'd bring coffee, sit on her porch, talk about nothing important. His friendship asked for nothing and gave steady companionship. She started to depend on those visits. "You doing okay?" he asked one evening, watching rain fall from the porch roof. "Define okay." "Fair point." Owen sipped his coffee. "You seem different than when you first got back." "Different how?" "More present, like you're actually here instead of somewhere else in your head." Callen considered this. He wasn't wrong. The constant urge to retreat, to hide, had lessened, maybe because she had nothing left to hide from. The past had caught up, examined her, and found her wanting. There was something freeing about having already failed so completely. "I talked to Emma yesterday," she said. "Just a quick call. She wanted to make sure I was all right." "That's good. She's a kind girl." "She is. Better than I deserve." Callen set down her mug. "She said Sophie's doing better. The anger's subsiding. Not that she wants to see me. Just the initial fury is fading." "Time helps." "Does it? Or does it just dull the edges while the wound stays open?" Owen looked at her thoughtfully. "Both, maybe. The wound stays, but the edges heal enough that you can function around it. Learn to live with it instead of being consumed by it." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the rain. Callen had learned that Owen was good at silence, didn't need to fill every moment with words. Another thing she appreciated about him. "I've been thinking," she said eventually, "about what I want. For the first time in 30 years, I'm actually thinking about the future instead of just surviving the present." "And what do you want?" "To stay here, in Ridgeline, near the mountains, but not hiding in them." She gestured at the cabin. "To have a place, a job, maybe actual human connections." "Sounds reasonable." "Does it? A 61-year-old woman starting completely over?" "Why not? You've got decades left if you're lucky. Might as well do something with them." Owen stood, stretching. "You know what you need? A project. Something to work toward." "Like what?" "I don't know. You're the one figuring out her life." He smiled. "But I've got faith you'll land on something." After he left, Callen sat thinking about projects. What did she want to build? Not another lodge, that chapter was closed, but something, some purpose beyond just existing. 2 weeks after returning to Ridgeline, Callen received an unexpected letter. The return address was Asheville, but not Maple Street. She opened it with shaking hands. The handwriting was unfamiliar. "Dear Callen, you don't know me, but my name is Sophie Rourke Brennan. Emma gave me your address. I asked her not to, but she did anyway, because she's stubborn and optimistic and believes people can change. I'm writing to tell you I don't forgive you. I want to be clear about that. You abandoned me at the worst possible time in my life, and I've spent 30 years dealing with that. No letter or conversation will undo that damage. But Emma thinks you're trying. She says you're genuinely sorry, that you're not making excuses or asking for forgiveness you don't deserve. That means something to her, so I'm trying to let it mean something to me. I'm not ready to meet you. I don't know if I ever will be. But I wanted you to know that I survived. I have a good life. I'm married to a kind man named David. I have 3 children, Emma, who you've met, and Tyler, 13, and Grace, 9. I teach high school English. I own a home. I'm happy. You didn't destroy me, even though you tried your best. I put myself back together without you, and I'm proud of that. Emma says you're living in Ridgeline now, that you're working and trying to build a life. Good. Do that. Build something. Just don't expect me to be part of it. Maybe someday I'll be ready to hear your apology in person. Maybe not. Either way, I'm done letting your abandonment define me. I'm moving forward, with or without closure from you. Emma will stay in touch with you if she chooses. I won't interfere with that. She's an adult, and she deserves to know her family if she wants to. But my other children don't know about you, and I'm not ready to tell them. Respect that boundary. That's all I have to say for now. Sophie Callen read the letter 3 times, then carefully folded it and put it in the drawer beside her bed. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't even really an opening, but it was acknowledgement. Sophie had survived, had thrived even. The guilt Callen carried was deserved, but it wasn't the whole story. Sophie had found her own strength, her own way forward. That knowledge hurt and healed at the same time. She pulled out paper and a pen she still wrote by hand, unused to computer keyboards, and composed a response. Dear Sophie, thank you for writing. You're right that you don't owe me forgiveness. You don't owe me anything. I'm proud of what you've accomplished. Proud isn't the right word, since I had no part in it. But I don't know what else to call the feeling. Relief, maybe, that you survived my failure. Joy that you found happiness despite me. I won't ask to meet your other children. I understand why you're protecting them from me. I would do the same. I'm staying in Ridgeline, working at a general store, renting a cabin, trying to figure out how to live a life I'm not ashamed of. It's harder than I expected. Turns out 30 years of hiding doesn't prepare you for normal existence. Emma is a remarkable young woman. Janice did a beautiful job raising her. I'm grateful she's willing to know me, but I understand if that changes. Whatever she needs is fine. I don't expect us to have a relationship. I just wanted you to know that I see what you've built, and I'm in awe of your strength. You deserved better than me as a mother. I'm sorry I couldn't be that. If you're ever ready to talk, I'm here. But no pressure, no expectations. Just if you ever need to say things to my face, I'll listen. Take care of yourself and your family. Callen. She mailed the letter the next day, then tried not to think about whether Sophie would respond. Either she would or she wouldn't. Callen couldn't control that. What she could control was building the life she'd mentioned. Actually building it, not just talking about it. She approached Mrs. Chen at the store. Would you need someone full-time? I'm reliable. I show up. I work hard. Mrs. Chen studied her. You planning to stay in Ridgeline long-term? Yes. Not going to run back to the mountains when things get hard? The directness was startling but fair. No, I'm done running. Mrs. Chen nodded slowly. Full-time comes with benefits, health insurance, retirement contribution, but the pay's not great. I don't need great. I just need steady. All right, trial basis. We'll see how it goes. Callen walked out of that conversation feeling lighter. A job, an actual job with benefits and structure and expectations. It was something to build on. Over the following weeks, life developed a rhythm. Work 5 days a week. Grocery shopping, cooking simple meals, maintaining the cabin, riding Ember on weekends, exploring trails she'd never bothered with when she lived deeper in the wilderness. Video calls with Emma every Sunday evening, carefully keeping conversation light and avoiding the Sophie-shaped elephant in the room. Owen continued his regular visits, and Callen found herself looking forward to them. They'd progressed from coffee on the porch to actual dinners, taking turns cooking. Owen was a better cook than she expected he'd learned after his divorce, teaching himself from YouTube videos. You're rebuilding, he observed one evening over chicken and vegetables. Actual rebuilding, not just survival. Trying to. It shows. You smile more. Did she? Callen hadn't noticed, but maybe that was the point. Real change happened gradually, in ways you didn't track. I got another letter from Sophie, she admitted. Short one. She's seeing a therapist, working through things. She said she might be open to a conversation someday. Emphasis on might. That's progress. Is it? Or is she just being kind to Emma? Does it matter? She's considering it. That's more than she was willing to do a month ago. Callen pushed food around her plate. I don't know what I'd say to her. If we did talk, you'd figure it out. You're good at that. Am I? You survived 30 years in the wilderness, then walked into the hardest conversation of your life, then rebuilt when everything fell apart. Yeah, I'd say you're good at figuring things out. His confidence in her felt unearned but welcome. Callen had spent so long seeing herself as a failure that any other perspective felt foreign. Thank you, she said quietly, for everything. The cabin, the friendship, the just. Thank you. Owen reached across the table, squeezing her hand briefly. You're welcome. But you're doing the actual work. I'm just watching and occasionally providing pie. They both smiled at that. It felt good to smile, to have a reason to smile, to have a person who made her want to. That night, lying in bed in her small cabin, Callen thought about progress. She'd gone from total loss to what? Not recovered, certainly. Not healed, but functioning, building, moving forward instead of hiding. It wasn't the life she'd imagined, but maybe that was okay. Maybe the life she'd imagined, isolated, simple, free from complication, had been the wrong goal all along. Maybe the point wasn't to avoid pain, but to face it, to acknowledge what you'd done wrong and try, however imperfectly, to do better. Outside, rain started again. Steady and gentle. The sound reminded her of nights in the lodge with Marcus, lying safe while storms passed over. She'd thought she was safe then. Thought isolation equaled protection. But safety wasn't hiding. Safety was having people who knew your worst self and showed up anyway. Like Emma, still calling every Sunday. Like Owen, still bringing coffee. Like Sophie, still considering whether conversation might be possible. Callen pulled the quilt up and closed her eyes. Tomorrow she'd work at the store. Next weekend she'd ride Ember. Next month she'd pay rent. Small steps, building towards something she couldn't quite see yet. But building. Actually building. That was enough for now. Autumn settled over ridgeline with the kind of color that reminded Callen why she'd loved these mountains in the first place. The aspens turned gold, the maples burned red, and the air carried that particular crispness that promised winter ahead. She'd lived through 29 autumns in her lodge, but this one felt different. Less like an ending, more like a transition. Work at the general store became routine. Mrs. Chen proved to be a fair boss, demanding but reasonable. Callen learned the rhythm of small-town commerce, the morning rush of workers grabbing coffee, the lunchtime lull, the afternoon uptick of people stopping on their way home. She learned names, recognized faces, participated in the small exchanges that constituted community. You settling in all right? Mrs. Chen asked one afternoon during a quiet moment. I think so. Still feels strange sometimes. You were up in Miller Valley a long time. Bound to feel strange. Mrs. Chen restocked cigarettes behind the counter. But you're doing good. Customers like you. You're not chatty, but you're kind. That matters. The approval felt disproportionately meaningful. Callen had spent so long without external validation that even mild praise landed with weight. Emma's Sunday calls continued, the conversations gradually deepening. They moved past surface pleasantries into real territory. Emma's frustrations with difficult parents at school, her dating life, her ongoing questions about family history. Callen answered what she could, filling in pieces of Sophie's childhood, her own mother's coldness, the generational patterns of distance and damage. I'm seeing a therapist too, Emma admitted one evening. Trying to process all of this, finding out about you, Sophie's reaction, the complexity of biological versus chosen family. That's wise. It's expensive is what it is. Emma laughed. But yeah, helpful. She's helping me understand that I can love Janice completely and still want to know you. that it's not betrayal to be curious about where I came from. Janice is your real mother, in every way that counts. I know, and I tell her that, but she's still worried I'll replace her or something. Emma sighed. Everyone's so scared and careful. I wish people could just be honest about their feelings. Callen smiled despite herself. You sound like you're 25. Because I am 25, and impatient with emotional complexity. Fair enough. They talked for another hour, and when they hung up, Callen felt the particular satisfaction of connection. She had a granddaughter who called her, who wanted to know her. It wasn't the relationship she'd have had if she'd been present all along, but it was real and growing. October brought the first snow, early even for the mountains. Callen woke to white covering the world, muffling sound, transforming everything. She made coffee and stood on her porch, watching, beautiful and intimidating at once. Owen appeared mid-morning, his truck crunching through the fresh snow. Checking on you, he said, climbing out. First snow makes me nervous about people living alone. I've survived 30 winters alone. Doesn't mean I can't check. They cleared her driveway together, working in companionable silence. The physical labor felt good, reminded Callen of why she'd loved mountain life. The directness of it, effort producing visible results, body and purpose aligned. Stay for lunch? She asked when they'd finished. If you're offering. She made soup from vegetables she'd bought at the store, simple but warm. They ate at her small table, boots drying by the door, the cabin heating up from the stove. Can I ask you something? Owen said eventually. Sure. What's your plan? Long term, I mean, you staying in Ridgeline permanently? Callen thought about it. I think so. I don't see myself leaving again. What about when winter really hits, when you're snowed in for days at a time? I'll manage. I've done it before, but before you had a whole lodge set up for it. Here you've got, he gestured around the small cabin. This is fine for now, but long term? Are you asking if I'm going to rebuild the lodge? I'm asking if you've thought about next steps, real next steps. Callen set down her spoon. I'm 61 years old, Owen. I work retail. I have limited savings and no real prospects. Next steps feel like a luxury. Bullshit. The bluntness startled her into a laugh. Excuse me? You heard me. You're using age as an excuse to stop trying. But 61 isn't dead. My mother's 83 and just learned to kayak. That's different. How? How is it different? Owen leaned forward. You've spent 30 years hiding, Callen. You don't get to use the next 30 as an excuse to keep hiding. You've got time. Use it. To do what? I don't know. What do you want? The question hung in the air. What did she want? Beyond basic survival, beyond rebuilding the minimum, what did she actually want? I want, she started, then stopped, tried again. I want to know my family, my granddaughter, my daughter if she'll allow it. I want to not be alone anymore. Okay, that's a start. What else? I want to feel useful, like I'm contributing something instead of just taking up space. Good, keep going. I want. This was harder. I want to forgive myself, or at least learn to live with what I've done. Owen nodded slowly. Those are all achievable. Hard, but achievable. So let's work backward. What would help you get there? They spent the afternoon planning. Actual planning, which Callen hadn't done in decades. Owen proved surprisingly good at it, asking questions that forced her to think concretely about possibilities. By the time he left, she had a rough outline. Keep the job at the store, but look for additional income sources. Consider taking some online courses she'd need to learn computer skills anyway. Find ways to volunteer, to contribute to the community. Stay in therapy. She'd started seeing someone in town, weekly sessions that were gradually chipping away at decades of avoidance. It wasn't a complete life plan, but it was something, a direction to move toward instead of just floating. That night, Callen pulled out paper and started writing. Not a letter this time, but a journal entry. The therapist had suggested it, writing down thoughts, tracking progress, creating a record of who she was becoming. Day 47 inches ridgeline, she wrote. First snow came. Owen visited. We talked about the future. I'm not used to thinking about the future. For 30 years, I lived in an eternal present, each day complete in itself. No thought to what came next. But that's not living. That's just existing. I want to live. Even now, even at this age, even with all I've destroyed, I want to actually live. That feels selfish and presumptuous and terrifying. But I think it's true. Emma called tonight. She's coming to visit next month, just for a weekend, but she wants to see where I live, meet Owen, see the mountains I talked about. The thought of her here, in my space, makes me nervous and excited at once. Sophie still hasn't responded to my last letter. I'm trying not to take it personally, but of course I take it personally. She's my daughter. Everything about her is personal to me, even after 30 years of absence. I miss Marcus today. I've been angry at him for keeping secrets, but mostly I miss him. He'd know what to say about all this. He always had a way of cutting through complexity to reach the simple truth. I wish I could ask him why he never told me. I wish I could thank him for protecting Emma. I wish a lot of things that can't happen now. Tomorrow I work the early shift. Then Owen and I are riding up to the old fire lookout tower. He says the view is worth the climb. I believe him. This is my life now. Small moments building towards something larger. It's not what I planned, but then again, I never really planned anything. Just reacted, ran, hid. Maybe it's time to actually choose. She closed the journal and climbed into bed. Outside, snow continued falling, steady and silent, covering the old, creating something new. Tomorrow would be another day of building, another day of trying, another day of not running away. Emma's visit arrived with November cold and early dark. Callen cleaned the cabin obsessively beforehand, washing windows that didn't need washing, organizing cabinets that were already organized. Nervous energy had to go somewhere. She's going to love it, Owen assured her, helping carry an extra firewood. Stop worrying. I'm not worrying. You've cleaned the bathroom 3 times today. It needed it. Owen smiled but didn't argue. He'd learned when to push and when to let her work through things her own way. Emma arrived Friday evening, driving a small sedan up the rutted driveway. She climbed out, bundled in a puffy jacket, looking younger than 25 in the fading light. "This is beautiful," she said, taking in the cabin and the forest beyond. "Exactly how I imagined." They hugged, less awkward now than their first meeting. Callen showed her around the modest space, feeling suddenly self-conscious about how little she had. But Emma seemed charmed rather than disturbed. "It's cozy. Very you." She set her bag in the bedroom. "And you're close to where your old lodge was?" "About 10 miles. We can ride up there tomorrow if you want. See the burn area." "I'd like that." They made dinner together, moving around each other in the small kitchen. Emma was comfortable in a way that suggested Janice had taught her. Well, confident with a knife, familiar with recipes, at ease in domestic space. Callen had never been particularly domestic. Survival cooking was different from the kind of thoughtful meal preparation Emma displayed. "Janice taught me to cook young," Emma explained, noticing Callen watching. "She said it was an essential life skill. I complained at the time, but now I'm grateful. She sounds like a good mother. The best." Emma smiled. "She's nervous about this visit, by the way, worried I'm replacing her or something. Are you reassuring her?" "Constantly. But I think she needs to sit with the discomfort. Her therapist says she's got abandonment issues from her own childhood." Emma paused. "Seems like abandonment runs in families." The observation landed quietly but firmly. Callen absorbed it, recognizing the truth. "I suppose it does." They ate at the small table, talking about Emma's drive, her week at school, the students who made her laugh, and the ones who broke her heart. Easy conversation, the kind that only came with growing comfort. Owen's stopping by tomorrow, Callen mentioned. He wants to meet you properly. The retired ranger who's been helping you. Yes, he's been a good friend. Emma's expression turned knowing. Just a friend? Emma. I'm just saying, you're allowed to have an actual life, romance included. I'm 61. So, my favorite teacher growing up got remarried at 72, happiest I've ever seen her. Emma leaned back in her chair. You've spent 30 years alone. Maybe that's enough alone time. Callen cleared dishes rather than respond. The suggestion wasn't new. She'd wondered herself about what, exactly, was developing between her and Owen. But naming it felt premature. She was still figuring out how to have basic human relationships. Romance seemed impossibly complex. That night, lying in the small bedroom while Emma took the couch, Callen listened to her granddaughter's soft breathing from the other room. Someone in her space, sharing her life, trusting her enough to sleep under her roof. It felt miraculous and terrifying at once. Morning brought clear, cold and blue sky. They bundled up and walked to the pasture where Ember lived now, sharing space with 3 other horses. Emma was comfortable around animals, stroking Ember's nose and speaking softly. The horse responded, leaning into Emma's touch the way she did with Callen. She's beautiful, Emma said. How old? 16, getting up there, but still strong. Owen arrived mid-morning with fresh pastries from the bakery in town. He and Emma hit it off immediately, bonding over a shared love of hiking and a similar sense of humor. Watching them talk, Callen felt a surprising warmth. Her 2 favorite people getting along, they rode out together, Callen on Ember, Owen and Emma on borrowed horses from the stable. The trail wound up through recovering forest, new growth pushing through the burn scars, life reasserting itself. Emma was quiet, taking it all in. It's not as devastated as I expected, she said finally. Nature recovers faster than you'd think, Owen explained. Give it 5 years, you won't even know a fire came through. They reached the site of Callen's old lodge around noon. The stone foundation remained, and the chimney, but everything else had been reclaimed by weather and time. Snow covered the clearing, softening the harsh edges. Callen dismounted and walked through the ruins slowly. She'd been back several times since the fire, but never with witnesses. Having Emma here changed the experience, made it real in a different way. You built this? Emma asked, standing where the front door had been. Marcus and I together, 28 years ago. It must have been amazing. It was. And it wasn't. Callen knelt, brushing snow from the hearthstone. It was beautiful and isolated and exactly what I thought I wanted, but I was hiding here, building walls, not a dints. Life. Emma squatted beside her. Do you miss it? Sometimes. But mostly I'm grateful it burned. I needed the push to leave, to face things I'd been avoiding, like Sophie, like you, like, she gestured vaguely. All of this, actual life. They explored for another hour, Emma asking questions about how the lodge had been laid out, what daily life had looked like. Callen answered honestly, not romanticizing but not condemning either. It had been her life for 3 decades. It deserved recognition, even as she moved past it. Owen had built a small fire in a cleared space and heated soup he'd brought in a thermos. They ate lunch, sitting on snow-covered logs, talking about nothing important. The companionship felt easy, natural. Callen couldn't remember the last time she'd felt this content. This was good, Emma said, as they prepared to ride back. Thank you for showing me. Thank you for wanting to see. That evening, after Owen left and dinner was finished, Emma pulled out her phone. I want to show you something, but it might be hard. Callen tensed. Okay. Emma scrolled, then turned the screen. Sophie sent me this last week. Her kids, your other grandchildren. The photo showed 2 children with a woman Callen recognized as Sophie. The boy was lanky and dark-haired, maybe 13. The girl was younger, bright smile, and Sophie's eyes. They looked happy, normal, completely unaware of the complicated history surrounding them. "Tyler and Grace," Emma said. "They don't know about you yet. Sophie's not ready." "I understand. Do you want to know about them?" "Yes, very much." Emma talked for an hour, sharing what she'd learned about her half-siblings. Tyler loved soccer and hated math. Grace was obsessed with horses and wanted to be a veterinarian. They had friends, hobbies, and lives that had nothing to do with Callen, but that she suddenly wanted to know everything about. "Sophie's a good mother," Emma said, eventually. "Really good. She's present and involved and everything you weren't." The honesty stung but felt important. "I'm glad. She deserved better than what I gave her. I'm glad she's giving her children what I couldn't. She wants to break the cycle. That's what she told me once. She said her whole approach to parenting is based on doing the opposite of what you did." Callen absorbed that. It hurt, but it also felt right. Then I gave her something useful after all. A template for what not to do. Emma looked at her seriously. "Do you really believe that? That the only thing you gave her was an example of failure? What else did I give her? I wasn't there. I abandoned her at the worst possible time. What positive thing could she have possibly gotten from me?" "Resilience." Emma spoke firmly. "She learned she could survive anything, that she was strong enough to build a life from nothing, that she didn't need you to succeed. Those are powerful lessons. Those are lessons no child should have to learn. Maybe. But she learned them anyway, and they've served her well. You can't take credit for her success, but you also can't pretend your absence didn't shape her into who she became." Emma paused. "I think that's what she's struggling with. How to acknowledge that your leaving hurt her but also made her stronger. Both things can be true." Callen sat with that complexity. Everything about this situation resisted simple narrative. She'd failed, yes. But Sophie had succeeded. Her absence had damaged but also strengthened. The contradictions were exhausting to hold. "I got another letter from her," Callen admitted, 2 weeks ago. "She said she's still thinking about meeting. Not ready, but thinking. That's more than I expected. What would you say to her if you did meet?" "I don't know. I'm sorry, seems inadequate. But it's all I've got." They talked late into the night, Emma sharing more stories about Sophie, about Janice, about her own internal struggles to reconcile her biological and adoptive families. Callen listened, offering what wisdom she could, which wasn't much. Mostly, she just bore witness, let Emma process out loud, supported her without trying to fix anything. When Emma finally went to bed, Callen sat by the wood stove, watching flames dance. The weekend had been good, better than good. Emma's presence had filled the cabin with life in a way that made Callen realize how empty it had been. Outside, wind moved through the pines, familiar and constant. The sound had lulled her to sleep for 30 years in the lodge. It still felt like home, not the cabin specifically, but this. Mountains, weather, the natural world moving in its eternal patterns. But now she had people too. Emma, Owen, even the customers at the store who greeted her by name. Small threads of connection, weaving together into something that resembled a life. It wasn't redemption. She'd never earned that. But maybe it was enough to simply continue to build what she could, acknowledge what she'd destroyed, and keep moving forward. The fire burned low. Callen added another log, watching sparks rise and disappear into darkness. Tomorrow, Emma would leave, back to Asheville and her own life. But they'd have this weekend, these conversations, this growing bond. It was more than Callen had any right to hope for. And for now, that was enough. Emma left Sunday afternoon, hugging Callen long and hard before climbing into her car. "I'll call you this week," she promised. "And I'm coming back for Thanksgiving, if that's okay." "You're always welcome." "I know, but I like hearing you say it." Callen watched the car disappear down the driveway, then stood in the sudden quiet of her cabin. The space felt emptier now, marked by Emma's absence. But it was a good empty, the kind that came from having had something warm and then missing it, rather than never having it at all. She was washing the weekend's dishes when her phone rang. Unknown number, but local area code. Hello? Miss Rourke? This is David Brennan. I'm Sophie's husband. Callen's heart stopped. Yes? I'm calling because... He paused, and she heard a door close in the background. Sophie's not ready to talk to you yet, but I wanted you to know that we're working on it. She's in therapy, processing a lot, and I think she'll reach out eventually. I just wanted you to know that someone's in your corner here. Why would you be in my corner? You don't know me. I know, Sophie. I know how this absence has haunted her, shaped her, and I think having closure, whatever that looks like, would help her. David's voice was calm, measured. I'm not saying you'll have a relationship, but I think she needs to see you, to say what she needs to say, to close this chapter properly. What can I do? Nothing. Just be patient. Don't push. Let her come to it in her own time. They talked for a few more minutes, David sharing small details about Sophie's life that felt like gifts. She taught at a good school, was respected by colleagues, loved by her students. She had a full life, good friends, a strong marriage. The picture he painted was of someone who'd thrived. Thank you, Callen said finally, for calling, for everything. Take care of yourself, Miss Rourke. After he hung up, Callen sat with the conversation, turning it over. Someone was advocating for her to Sophie's husband, trying to build bridges. It wasn't Sophie herself reaching out, but it was progress. Winter deepened. Snow became constant, the world going white and quiet. Callen adapted to the rhythm of small-town winters, shoveling, heating, the particular coziness of being warm while the world froze outside. Work at the store was steady, and Mrs. Chen had made her full-time permanent. The regular paycheck felt miraculous after years of subsistence living. Owen's visits increased as the weather worsened, often bringing supplies so she wouldn't have to venture out. Their friendship had deepened into something Callen couldn't quite name. More than companionship, not quite romance, though the potential hung unspoken between them. You ever think about the future? Owen asked one evening over dinner. I'm trying to focus on the present. Cop-out answer. Maybe, but true. Callen refilled his coffee. I spent 30 years trying not to think about anything. Now I'm supposed to suddenly have a 5-year plan? I'm not talking 5 years. I'm talking next week, next month, small future. All right, next week I work, ride Ember if the weather clears, call Emma on Sunday. Next month I save money, maybe take Emma up on her offer to visit Asheville again. That future enough for you? Owen smiled. It's a start. They were clearing dishes when he said, carefully casual, there's a Christmas dance at the community center. Town tradition. Everyone goes. Want to come with me? Callen's hand stilled in the soapy water. As your date? As my friend, or as my date, whichever you're comfortable with. I don't dance. Neither do I. We can stand awkwardly by the punch bowl together. Despite herself, Callen laughed. That sounds terrible. Probably, but we'd be terrible together. She turned to face him, dish towel in hand. Owen stood in her small kitchen looking hopeful and vulnerable at once. This man who'd shown up for her repeatedly, asking nothing, offering everything. All right, she said. Yes, as your date. His smile was worth the terror of committing to something so normal and public. The dance was exactly as terrible and wonderful as promised. The community center was decorated with paper snowflakes and string lights. A local band played covers of songs Callen vaguely remembered. Half the town seemed to be there, from teenagers to elderly couples who'd been dancing together for decades. Callen felt massively out of place in her one decent dress, borrowed from Mrs. Chen, who'd insisted. But Owen was right there beside her, looking equally uncomfortable in a button-down shirt, and somehow that helped. They did stand by the punch bowl, watching others dance. Mrs. Chen stopped to say hello, along with several regular customers. People were friendly, inclusive, acting like Callen belonged here. It was disorienting and warming at once. "One dance," Owen said eventually. "Just one, so we can say we did it. I'll step on your feet. I'll survive." They moved onto the floor during a slow song. Owen was a decent dancer, not skilled, but comfortable enough to lead. Callen followed awkwardly, hyper-aware of his hand on her waist, her hand in his. When had she last been this close to another person? Marcus had been dead 7 years. Before that, their physical relationship had been more companionable than passionate. "You're thinking too hard," Owen murmured. "I'm thinking the right amount. Relax, it's just dancing." But it wasn't just dancing. It was intimacy, connection, vulnerability. It was allowing someone close enough to hurt you, trusting they wouldn't. Callen had spent 30 years avoiding exactly this. The song ended. They separated, and Callen felt the loss of contact like a physical thing. Owen was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Thank you," she said, "for this, for everything." "You're welcome." But Callen, he stepped closer, voice low enough that only she could hear. "I'm not just being a friend here. I want you to know that. I'm interested. In you. In more." Her breath caught. "Owen, you don't have to respond now. I just wanted you to know. So you're not surprised when I keep showing up." Before she could find words, the music started again, and someone pulled Owen away to talk. Callen retreated to the bathroom, needing space to process. Owen was interested in her. Romantically. At 61, after 30 years alone, someone wanted her. It was terrifying and exhilarating, and she had no idea what to do with it. She splashed water on her face and stared at her reflection. The woman looking back was older, weathered, marked by hard living and harder choices. But her eyes were clearer than they'd been in years. Present, engaged, alive. "You can do this," she told her reflection. "You can have a life. You can let someone in." Back in the main room, Owen was waiting. He didn't push, didn't demand a response, just offered his arm and walked with her through the rest of the evening. Easy, patient, exactly what she needed. Driving home, Owen insisted, given the icy roads they were quiet. But it was comfortable silence, the kind that came from understanding. "I'm scared," Callen admitted as he pulled up to her cabin. "Of what?" "Everything. Connection, intimacy, disappointing you." She looked at him in the dashboard light. "I'm not good at this. At people. You're better than you think." "That's a low bar." Owen smiled. "Maybe, but you're clearing it." He reached over, taking her hand. "I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give. I'm just asking you to consider the possibility that you deserve good things. That's all." "I don't." "Yes, you do. I know your history. Emma's told me some, you've told me more. And you made terrible choices, yes. But you're here now, doing the work, facing what you ran from. That counts for something." Callen squeezed his hand, unable to voice the emotions rising in her throat. Owen had become essential somehow, a anchor point, a reminder that the world held kindness. "Thank you," she managed finally. "For what?" "For seeing me, the real me, not just the person who ran away. That's the only you I want to see." She kissed him then, surprising them both. Brief and awkward, and perfect. When she pulled back, Owen was smiling. "Was that okay?" Callen asked. "More than okay." They said goodnight, and Callen walked into her cabin feeling lighter than she had in decades. She had a granddaughter who loved her, a daughter who might someday talk to her, a man who saw her clearly and wanted her anyway. A job, a home, a life. It wasn't everything. It wasn't redemption, but it was something real and growing. And for now, that was enough. Christmas approached with the particular magic of mountain winters. The world went white and still, every tree branch crystalline, every morning sharp with cold. Callen had never been sentimental about holidays. They'd been mostly ignored in the lodge, just another day marked only by colder temperatures. But this year felt different. Emma called on December 15th with unexpected news. Sophie wants to meet you. Callen sat down hard on her bed. What? She's ready. Well, not ready, she's terrified. But she wants to do it. Her therapist thinks it's time. Emma's voice was careful, measured. She has conditions, though. Anything. Neutral location, just the two of you, no one else. And she wants you to know that meeting doesn't mean forgiveness. It just means she's willing to listen. When? Day after Christmas. There's a coffee shop in Hickory, halfway between here and Ridgeline. 2 p.m. Callen wrote down the details with shaking hands. Hickory, 2 p.m., day after Christmas. She'd have to drive. Owen could lend her his truck. She'd have to prepare what to say, though no words felt adequate. She'd have to face the daughter she'd abandoned 30 years ago and somehow find language for the enormity of what she'd done. Thank you, she told Emma, for advocating, for pushing. Don't thank me yet. This could go badly. I know, but at least it's happening. The days until Christmas crawled by. Callen worked, rode, spent time with Owen, but her mind was elsewhere, rehearsing conversations, imagining outcomes. Owen noticed, but didn't push, just stayed steady and present. Christmas Eve, Owen invited her to dinner at his place. His house was small but warm, decorated modestly, a real tree in the corner, lights strung around the windows. He'd cooked a full meal, roast chicken and vegetables, pie for dessert. This is too much, Callen protested. It's Christmas Eve, and your family now. Owen said it simply, as if it were obvious. Family. The word landed strange and perfect. She had family, Emma, potentially Sophie someday, and now Owen too, in whatever form their relationship took. They ate and talked, the conversation meandering comfortably. Owen shared stories from his earlier Christmases, his sons as children, his ex-wife's elaborate decorating, traditions that had been lost in the divorce. Callen shared her sparse memories of holidays with Sophie, the lean years when she'd been too depressed to manage much celebration. I was a terrible mother, she said, staring at her wine. Even before I left, I was terrible. Maybe, but terrible doesn't mean irredeemable. Sophie might disagree. Sophie gets to feel however she feels, but you're still doing the work. That counts. Owen refilled her glass. You ready for tomorrow? No, not even remotely. Good. If you felt ready, I'd be worried you weren't taking it seriously. They moved to the living room, sitting on his couch with the tree lights glowing. Outside, snow fell gently, covering everything fresh and clean. Inside was warm, safe, marked by Owen's steady presence. Can I tell you something? Callen asked. Always. I'm happy. Right now, in this moment, I'm actually happy. And that feels wrong somehow, given everything I've done. Owen turned to face her. Why would happiness be wrong? Because I don't deserve it. Sophie's still hurt. Emma's still processing. Marcus is dead partly because of choices I made. How can I sit here feeling content when I've caused so much damage? Because punishing yourself doesn't undo the damage. Because you're allowed to be human. Because happiness isn't a reward for perfection, it's just a state you can choose or reject. Owen took her hand. You've spent 30 years in self-imposed exile. Maybe that's enough punishment. Maybe it's time to actually live. Callen leaned against him, letting his certainty anchor her. You make it sound so simple. It is simple. Not easy, but simple. Choose to live. Choose to be present. Choose to accept that you're imperfect and worth loving anyway. I'm working on it, I know, and I'm here while you work. They sat in comfortable silence, watching snow fall. Callen thought about Sophie, about the meeting in 2 days, about all the ways it could go wrong. But beneath the anxiety was something else. Hope, maybe, or at least the willingness to try. Christmas morning, Emma called with video chat. She was at Janice's house, the two of them together in the kitchen making breakfast. They'd invited Callen to join the call, and for 20 minutes she was part of their morning, laughing at stories, offering cooking advice, feeling like a member of something bigger than herself. "Merry Christmas, Grandma," Emma said before hanging up. Grandma. The title still felt unearned, but Emma gave it freely. Callen accepted it, let herself claim the role she'd never thought she'd have. Owen picked her up mid-afternoon for the drive to his older son's house. Jake had invited them both for Christmas dinner, a gesture that felt simultaneously normal and impossible. Callen meeting his family, being introduced as his girlfriend at 61, participating in his real life. Jake's house was chaos in the best way. His 3 kids, ages 8, 6, and 4, ran around with the manic energy of children hopped up on Christmas sugar. Jake's wife, Michelle, was warm and welcoming, acting like it was perfectly normal for Owen to bring his mountain woman girlfriend to Christmas. "Dad talks about you constantly," Jake said while helping set the table. "He's happier than I've seen him in years." "Really? Really? Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." Dinner was loud and messy, kids interrupting, food passed in chaotic patterns, conversation overlapping in the way of big families. Callen sat beside Owen, overwhelmed and grateful, watching this family that had somehow opened to include her. "Driving home," Owen asked, "was that okay? I know meeting my family might have been too much." "It was perfect, loud and chaotic and perfect. Jake likes you, Michelle too." "How can you tell?" "We barely talked. They invited us back for New Year's. That's their stamp of approval." Callen laughed, feeling light despite tomorrow's looming meeting. She had this Owen's family, Emma, a life building in unexpected directions. Whatever happened with Sophie, she had this. Back at her cabin, Owen walked her to the door. They'd fallen into the habit of these doorway goodnights, not quite ready to move past them, but comfortable in their ritual. "Tomorrow's the big day," Owen said. "You want company for the drive?" "No. This is something I need to do alone." "Fair enough, but I'll be here when you get back. Promise?" "Promise." He kissed her forehead. "You've got this, Callen. You're stronger than you know." After he left, Callen sat on her couch and tried to imagine tomorrow, walking into that coffee shop, seeing Sophie for the first time in 30 years, finding words for the inexcusable. She pulled out paper and started writing not a speech, but notes, things she needed Sophie to know. The apology, yes, but also the acknowledgement. The acceptance that nothing she said would undo the damage. The understanding that Sophie owed her nothing. She wrote for hours, crossing out and revising, until she had something approaching truth. Then she folded the pages and put them in her jacket pocket. Tomorrow she'd either use them or not. But having them felt important, a tether to what she needed to say. That night, Callen dreamed of Sophie as a child. 6 years old, holding her hand, asking questions about clouds and trees and why the sky was blue. In the dream, Callen had all the answers, and Sophie looked at her with complete trust. She woke crying. That little girl had trusted her completely, and Callen had destroyed that trust, left her alone when she was barely more than a child herself. Tomorrow she'd try to explain. It wouldn't be enough. But maybe it would be a start. The drive to Hickory took 2 hours through mountains still heavy with Christmas snow. Callen drove Owen's truck carefully, hands tight on the wheel, mind racing through scenarios. She arrived 30 minutes early and sat in the parking lot, watching the coffee shop door. At 5 minutes to 2, a car pulled up. A woman got out mid-40s, dark hair pulled back, wearing a heavy coat against the cold. Callen's breath caught. Sophie, 30 years older, but unmistakably her daughter. She had the same way of moving, the same set to her shoulders when she was nervous. Callen watched Sophie pause at the coffee shop door, gathering courage. Then she went inside. 3 more minutes. Callen counted them, forcing herself to breathe. Then she got out of the truck and walked across the parking lot. Each step felt monumental, Inside, the coffee shop was half full, warm against the December chill. Sophie sat at a corner table, hands wrapped around a mug, staring at the door. Their eyes met. For a moment, neither moved. Then Callen crossed to the table, every step carrying 30 years of distance. "Sophie, Mom." The word came out strange, like Sophie was testing it. "Sit." Callen sat. Up close, she could see the fine lines around Sophie's eyes, the threads of grey in her dark hair, the way time had marked them both. But underneath, this was still her daughter, still the girl she'd left behind. "Thank you for agreeing to meet." Sophie's laugh was bitter. "David convinced me, said I'd regret it if I didn't at least hear you out." She took a sip of coffee, hands trembling slightly. "So here I am. Talk." Callen pulled out the folded papers from her pocket, then pushed them aside. Words on paper felt inadequate. She needed to speak directly. "I'm sorry. I know that's not enough, but it's where I have to start. I'm sorry for leaving, for abandoning you when you needed me most, for being a terrible mother even before I left." The words came slowly, carefully. "There's no excuse for what I did. I was depressed, overwhelmed, drowning, but none of that justifies leaving a 16-year-old alone." Sophie's expression was unreadable. "Go on. I found out about Emma, about your pregnancy. I didn't know. At the time I was so absent I didn't even notice my own daughter was carrying a child." Callen's voice cracked. "That failure is mine, and I'm sorry. Marcus told me you didn't know. I didn't believe him at first, thought he was making excuses for you." Sophie's eyes were hard. "But Emma believes you, says you seemed genuinely shocked." "I was. I spent 30 years hiding from what I'd done, telling myself you were better off without me. Then I found Marcus's letters and realized I'd missed everything. Your whole life, Emma's life, everything important. You were better off, or I was." Sophie leaned forward. "Let's be clear, you left for you, not for me. You couldn't handle being a mother, so you ran. Don't pretend it was some noble sacrifice. You're right, I left for me, because I was a coward who couldn't face her own failures." The admission seemed to surprise Sophie. "At least you're not making excuses." "There are no excuses." They sat in tense silence. Around them, other customers talked and laughed, oblivious to the decades of pain compressed into this small table. "I hated you," Sophie said finally. "For so long, I hated you more than I thought it was possible to hate another person. You left me alone, pregnant, terrified. Do you have any idea what that was like?" "No. I can imagine, but I can't truly know. I thought I'd driven you away. Thought if I'd just been a better daughter, less angry, less difficult." Sophie's voice broke. "It took years of therapy to understand that your leaving was about you, not me. That I was a child, and you were supposed to be the adult." Callen felt tears on her face, but didn't wipe them away. "You're right, about all of it. You deserved better." "I did. And you know what? I gave myself better. I raised myself, got myself through high school, through college. I made myself into a good mother because I knew exactly what not to do." Sophie's voice was fierce now. "I succeeded despite you, not because of you." "I know, and I'm proud." Callen stopped, recognizing the absurdity. "That's wrong. I don't have any right to pride in what you've accomplished. But I'm glad. Glad you survived and thrived and built a good life. Don't you dare try to take credit for my resilience. I'm not. I'm glad you made it. That's all." Sophie stared at her for a long moment. "Why now? Why show up after 30 years? The fire forced me out, made me face things I'd been hiding from. I found the lockbox and couldn't pretend anymore. Couldn't keep hiding in the mountains while you and Emma existed without me knowing. So if there hadn't been a fire, you'd have just stayed gone, hidden forever, probably." "Yes." Callen met her daughter's eyes. "I'm not here to make myself look better, Sophie. I'm here because I owe you the truth. And the truth is I'm a coward who needed life to burn down around me before I'd face what I'd done. At least you're honest. It's the minimum I can offer. Sophie took out her phone, scrolling to a photo. This is Tyler and Grace, your other grandchildren. She turned the screen. They don't know about you. They know Emma is their half-sister, that I had her young and placed her for adoption, but they don't know I have a mother. As far as they're concerned, their grandparents are David's parents. Callen looked at the children, her grandchildren, and felt the loss acutely. They're beautiful. They are, and they're mine to protect, so I need you to understand something. Sophie's voice turned hard. Meeting you today doesn't mean you're part of our lives. It just means I'm giving myself closure. I'm facing the woman who abandoned me, saying what I need to say, and moving on. I understand. Do you? Because Emma seems to think you're rebuilding, making amends, becoming someone worth knowing. But I don't see that. I see someone who got forced out of hiding and is now trying to feel better about herself by apologizing. The words stung because they held truth. Maybe you're right. Maybe this is selfish. But I'm here anyway because you deserve to say everything you need to say, even if it's just telling me what a failure I am. Sophie laughed, but there were tears in her eyes now. You want absolution. That's what this is. No, I want you to be okay. That's what I want. I am okay. I'm better than okay. I have a husband who loves me, children I'm raising right, a career I'm proud of. I'm happy, Mom, without you. The mom landed like a punch. After 30 years, hearing Sophie use that word felt impossible. I'm glad, Callen whispered. That's what I hoped for, that you'd find happiness despite me. They sat in heavy silence. Callen could see Sophie struggling, emotions warring across her face. Anger, grief, confusion, all of it swirling, unresolved. I don't forgive you, Sophie said finally. I can't. What you did, leaving me like that, I can't just forgive that. I don't expect you to. But, Sophie took a shaky breath, but I don't hate you anymore. I did for years, but it was exhausting. Hating you took so much energy, so I'm letting that go. Not for you, for me. That's fair. That's more than fair. I'm not saying we'll have a relationship. I'm not inviting you to family dinners or introducing you to my kids. But maybe, Sophie hesitated, maybe we could do this again. Talk again. Not soon, but eventually. Hope flared in Callen's chest. I'd like that, whenever you're ready. I'm not promising anything. I know. Sophie stood, gathering her coat. This was hard. I know. Thank you for doing it anyway. At the door, Sophie paused, looking back. Emma said, You're seeing someone, a retired ranger. Owen. Yes. Is it serious? I think so. Maybe. I'm still figuring it out. Sophie's expression softened slightly. Good. Everyone deserves someone. Even you. Then she was gone, the door closing behind her. Callen sat alone at the table, feeling wrung out and strangely lightened at once. It hadn't been forgiveness. It hadn't even been reconciliation. But it had been real, honest. A beginning, however tentative. She'd faced her daughter, said the things that needed saying, and Sophie had listened, responded, left the door open, not wide, but open for future conversation. It was more than Callen had any right to hope for, and it was enough. 3 months later, spring arrived with tentative warmth and the first brave shoots of green pushing through melting snow. Callen stood on her porch with coffee, watching the world wake up, and felt something she barely recognized. Peace. Not complete, not earned, but present nonetheless. The month since meeting, Sophie had been quiet but full. Work at the store had become genuinely enjoyable. Mrs. Chen had made her assistant manager, which came with a small raise and more responsibility. Emma called twice a week now, their conversations comfortable and rambling. And Owen had become essential, his presence as natural as breathing. They'd progressed carefully, testing the boundaries of their relationship. Some nights he stayed over, some nights he didn't. They talked about everything and nothing, learning each other's histories and habits. He'd met Emma when she visited again in February, and they'd bonded immediately over terrible jokes and a shared love of historical documentaries. "You look happy," Owen observed one evening, watching her cook dinner in his kitchen. "I'm getting there. That's more than you could say 6 months ago." It was true. 6 months ago, she'd been standing in the ashes of her lodge, holding a lockbox that would change everything. Now she was here cooking in her boyfriend's kitchen, planning a weekend ride with her granddaughter, exchanging occasional emails with her daughter. Sophie had written 3 times since their meeting. Short emails, carefully worded, but each one a small connection. She'd sent photos of Tyler and Grace, shared updates about her teaching, asked careful questions about Callen's life. They were building something fragile and new, not a traditional mother-daughter relationship, but something honest. "I got another email from Sophie," Callen said, stirring sauce. "She's thinking about bringing the kids to the mountains this summer. Camping trip. She asked if we might overlap somewhere. Not together, just in the same general area." Owen smiled. "That's progress. Is it? Or is it just her being kind to Emma, who really wants us all to connect? Does it matter? She's considering it. That's what counts." Callen plated dinner pasta with vegetables, simple but good. They ate at Owen's table, the one that had become as familiar as her own. "I've been thinking," Owen said between bites, "about the future. Our future." Callen's stomach tightened. "Okay, I'm not proposing. Don't panic." He smiled at her obvious relief. "But I want you to know I'm in this. Seriously, in this. Whatever this becomes, I'm here. Even though I'm a mess with a complicated history, especially because you're a mess with a complicated history. Makes you interesting." She laughed despite herself. "That's one word for it. I mean it, Callen. You've done the work. You've faced what you ran from, apologized where you could, built a life when everything burned down. That's not nothing. It's not redemption either. Who said anything about redemption? I'm talking about living. Actually living, not just surviving." Owen reached across the table, taking her hand. "You're allowed to be happy, even you. You keep saying that, because you keep not believing it." They cleaned up together, moving around the kitchen in practice synchronization. Callen felt the comfort of routine, the pleasure of shared space. This simple domesticity was something she'd never expected to have again. Later, sitting on Owen's couch with the evening light fading, Callen pulled out her phone. Emma had sent photos from a school field trip, her students at a science museum. Callen scrolled through them, smiling at the chaos and joy visible in each frame. "She's a good teacher," Owen observed, looking over her shoulder. "She is." Janice raised her well. "You keep giving Janice all the credit." "Because it's true. I had nothing to do with who Emma became. You gave her genetics. That counts for something." Callen elbowed him. "That's terrible logic." "Maybe, but I like seeing you smile at pictures of your granddaughter. It's good." That night, lying beside Owen in his bed, Callen thought about the word he'd used. Future. For 30 years, she'd avoided thinking beyond the immediate present. Planning felt dangerous, like inviting fate to disrupt whatever fragile stability she'd achieved. But maybe it was time to trust in possibility, to believe that happiness wasn't something that would be inevitably taken away, but something she could build and maintain through conscious choice. "Owen," she whispered into the darkness. "Yeah? Thank you. For everything. For being patient while I figured my life out. You're still figuring it out. We both are." He pulled her closer. "That's what makes it interesting." She fell asleep, feeling safe, a sensation so foreign it took her a moment to name it. Safe, connected, home. The next morning, Callen returned to her cabin to find an envelope pushed under the door. Her heart jumped. Mail usually came to the post office box in town. This had been hand-delivered. Inside was a card with a simple message in Sophie's handwriting. "Tyler's soccer game, April 15th, Charlotte. 10 a. You're invited. Not to meet them, they still don't know about you, but to watch, to see them in their real life. If you want to, no pressure. Sophie. Callen read it 3 times, hands shaking. Sophie was inviting her to see her grandchildren. Not meet them, not interact, just witness their lives. It was more than she'd hoped for. She called Emma immediately. She told me she was thinking about it, Emma said, excitement clear in her voice. This is huge, Grandma. She's letting you in, just to watch, from a distance. That's how it starts. You watch. She sees you there. Tyler and Grace get used to the idea of you existing. Baby steps. Callen called Owen next. Sophie invited me to Tyler's soccer game. That's wonderful. Are you going? I think so. Yes. I'm terrified, but yes. Want company? Would you come? Of course. You're not doing this alone. April 15th arrived with perfect spring weather. Callen and Owen drove to Charlotte in his truck, Callen's nerves increasing with every mile. She'd brought binoculars, Sophie had said, to keep distance, and Callen would respect that boundary completely. The soccer field was crowded with parents and siblings, everyone cheering for their kids. Callen and Owen found a spot at the far end of the bleachers, away from the main crowd. From here, she could see the field clearly, but wasn't close enough to be noticed. Sophie arrived with David and the kids. Callen's breath caught. There they were, her grandchildren, real and present. Tyler was tall for 13, all gangly limbs and teenage awkwardness. Grace bounced with energy, chattering at her parents while they found seats. Emma was there too, sitting with Sophie's family, and she spotted Callen across the field. She waved subtly, smiling. Sophie noticed and looked over. For a long moment, mother and daughter made eye contact across the distance. Then Sophie nodded acknowledgement, permission, and turned back to the game. Callen watched Tyler play with the intensity of someone memorizing every moment. He was good, fast, coordinated, completely absorbed in the game. When he scored, the family erupted in cheers, and Callen found herself cheering too, quietly, from her distant seat. Grace spent half the game playing with other siblings, running around behind the bleachers. At one point she came close to where Callen and Owen sat, chasing a ball that had rolled their way. Callen picked it up and handed it to her. "Thanks," Grace said brightly, already running back. "My granddaughter," Callen thought. "I just handed a ball to my granddaughter and she doesn't even know who I am." The game ended with Tyler's team winning. The family gathered on the field, congratulating the players. Callen watched Sophie hug her son, ruffle Grace's hair, smile at something David said. This was her daughter's life, full and happy and complete without her. As they prepared to leave, Sophie walked over. She came alone, leaving her family by the car. "You came," she said simply. "Thank you for inviting me." "This is Owen?" Owen stood, offering his hand. "Nice to meet you, Sophie." Sophie shook it, studying him. "Emma says you're good for her." "Mom, I mean, she's good for me too." Sophie turned back to Callen. "Tyler played well today." "He did. You must be proud." "I am." Sophie glanced back at her family. "They don't know who you are. I told them you're Emma's friend, visiting from out of town. That's fine. Whatever you need. Maybe." Sophie hesitated. "Maybe next time you could sit closer." Still not meeting them, but closer. Hope swelled in Callen's chest. "I'd like that." Sophie nodded and walked back to her family. Callen watched them drive away, feeling the ache of connection and distance both. "That was good," Owen said, arm around her shoulders. "It was more than good. It was a gift." They drove back to Ridgeline in comfortable silence. Callen processed the day, seeing her grandchildren, Sophie's tentative invitation for next time, the slow building of something that might eventually be called family. It wasn't redemption. She'd never earned that. But it was forgiveness beginning, healing starting, walls coming down. That evening, sitting on her porch with Owen beside her and the mountains spread before her, Callen let herself imagine a future. More soccer games, gradual introductions, maybe someday actually being acknowledged as grandmother. Emma visiting regularly, Sophie's walls slowly lowering, a family rebuilding from ruins. She pulled out her journal and wrote, Day 187 inches ridgeline. Spring is here. The world is coming back to life, and so am I. I saw my grandchildren today, watched Tyler play soccer, handed Grace a ball, sat with my daughter's permission in the same space as her family. It wasn't much, but it was everything. Sophie is giving me a chance. Not forgiveness, we're not there yet, may never be, but a chance to be present, to witness, to maybe eventually belong. I don't know what comes next. But for the first time in 30 years, I'm not afraid to find out. I have Owen, Emma, work I enjoy, a place I belong, and maybe, someday, I'll have Sophie too. Not the relationship we should have had, but something real and honest, built on the ashes of what burned. The wildfire took everything I thought I needed, but in the ashes I found what I actually needed: truth, connection, courage, to face what I'd run from. Some things survive fire, the important things, family, second chances, the possibility of becoming who you should have been all along. I'm not redeemed, but I'm here, present, trying, building. And somehow, impossibly, that's enough. She closed the journal and looked out at the mountains, these ancient witnesses to human struggle and survival. The peaks stood unchanged, patient, holding space for all the small human dramas playing out below. Callen took Owen's hand, feeling the warmth of connection, and let herself smile. She'd lost 30 years to fear and running, but she had now. She had tomorrow. She had the chance to keep building, keep trying, keep becoming. The sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in colors that took her breath away, beautiful and temporary, like everything worth having. She was home,